remind you, house where the murder happened is on the right here. And then we come up, I find this very, very interesting. This is a big parking lot, literally right behind the house where the murders happened. This would be a place where, look, I got stuck here.
So I think he was about to say this could be a place where the vehicle could have been parked, right? That's certainly a possibility that this is the parking lot. And I mean, that the car, the white Hyundai could have been parked over here. One reason why you would imagine it wouldn't be parked next to the house is there's sort of a residential complex right next door, and it would be easy just to look down onto the balcony onto that. So before we get going, I want to play one more clip, just bearing in mind this is another tweet from Brian Anton just saying Idaho will be busy this weekend because of graduation, and a story that has come out just in the past hour. Police have put out an update to say people must be vigilant. There could be another attack this weekend. Someone may be feeling very disenfranchised, very wronged, may still have a gripe, may still have a grudge against fellow students. And so this is really the last chance for that particular individual to target his fellow students. And that's why they're saying, stay vigilant, travel in groups, communicate with family and friends as you travel, right? So let's play another clip dealing with what the neighbor heard. And I think it actually comes from the Idaho Statesman, but it's Ashley Banfield that's repeating that mainstream media news. Let's listen in.
Another neighbor described the quiet as bizarre. He also told the newspaper he thinks he may have heard a scream as he was dozing off about 4 a.m. And that is the same time police say the murders likely occurred. The neighbor said he dismissed that scream as a party sound and said he didn't think anything of it, even when investigators knocked on his door the next day. He also says he told police about a black luxury SUV that he hadn't seen in the neighborhood before. He said it was only parked a few spaces away from the front of the crime scene. But late today, police told this program exclusively, and I...
So that's quite interesting, this idea that there's maybe another vehicle to look at, this black luxury SUV. And of course, not to put too plain a point on it, but this whole idea that, are we looking for a white Hyundai Elantra, which is a certain kind of vehicle, a certain sort of ordinary kind of vehicle, one could say, or are we looking for a black SUV? I mean, you can imagine the person driving these two vehicles are totally different individuals. So which is it? So the other thing that I think is quite interesting is this individual says, as he was dozing off, he heard these noises, right? We're going to come back to the significance of that. We are going to come back to the significance of that. So first, just a quick hello to some of you guys, Pauline Buckle, Susan Campbell, Terry Dean, Sharon, Annie, all of you guys, SW Firefly. Good to see you guys. I'm going to kind of get down to brass tacks and sort of go through the spiel that I've already prepared, and then we'll sort of take some questions. Are you guys good with that? Make sure you vote in the poll if you haven't already. You know, the question is, do we know why at this point? Can we know why? What do you guys think about the why, right? So we'll deal with that in more detail. I'm going to share with you my take, my assessment on the why after 4 weeks, although I've got to say, I don't really think it's changed much over the period of 4 weeks. And then also sort of address this idea of, do we really not know why? And also, if you know why, you kind of know who, right? So let's kind of deal with that. Okay, shall I take this out? So 1 month later, and we still don't know who or why, or do we? Christmas is almost here, and Yet what happened almost a month ago tonight is still real. All 4 victims are still dead, as they will be this Christmas, next Christmas, and the Christmas after that. There's this strange tension between students that are graduating and students that are in mourning, students that are wanting to go on holiday and look forward to time with their families, and families that are going to have no students coming home. There's that tension between Christmas and the New Year and all the hope that represents, a new start, a new life after college, and the sort of contrast with someone whose life is ended. There's no new story, there's no new start, right? And that really hit me when I was watching the police chief. I think he was interviewed by the Daily Mail. I don't really want to open the link up because for whatever reason, it seems to be crashing my computer. I really don't know why. But anyway, I might open it up a little bit later, but it's where the police chief is talking kind of in the background and context of the Christmas parade that sort of goes through every year, goes through Idaho, Moscow, Idaho every year. And so you're literally seeing people singing, you're seeing all these Christmas lights, you're seeing all of that gaiety, all of that joy, all of that Christmas spirit. And of course, that's in a way, for us, the true crime community, it's this merry background to something that is undeniably grim, right? So within the context of Christmas celebrations, isn't it strange that somehow life must go on? Everyone else should get to celebrate Christmas and still enjoy themselves, in spite of these 4 people who can't, and their families who will have a hard time celebrating, right? But for the others, there's this sort of feeling, well, I would like my life to go on. I would like to enjoy this time of celebration, despite what has happened. And isn't that maybe what the killer felt? Didn't the killer think, what about me? I want to have fun at this time. I also want to be happy, and you're ruining it for me. It's strange because while life must go on, even within the context of Christmas, this quadruple murder investigation must also go on, right? It feels a lot like the ghastly ignominy of the JonBenet Ramsey case, doesn't it? Instead of wrapped Christmas presents, there's a dead little girl under the Christmas tree. And of course, 26, now going on 27 years later, there sort of still is, in terms of there's still, in a symbolic way, a dead little girl under the Christmas tree, because there's kind of been no justice in that case. In this case, where we are now, we sort of have 4 dead University of Idaho students under the Christmas tree. We're sort of almost reaching Christmas. And instead of joy and, celebrating the achievements of the year, it feels like we are dealing with something that is not an achievement, it's a setback. And all the bright red you see between the green, of the Christmas tree aren't Santa Claus hats or Rudy the reindeer's nose. It's not tinsel or baubles or mistletoe, it's blood. And the killer is still out there, which is why we've seen reports like this. Let's see if I can just bring it up. This is something separate. But we've seen reports like this, just saying the police have put out an update saying, be vigilant. The killer is still out there, right? Sorry, let me just show that one more time. That's from Brian Enton. Okay. Why is the area that TCRS specializes in? I've written a lot of books about true crime, and the area that we sort of gravitate to in those narratives is invariably why. What are the dynamics? It's why in a macro way, the forces of the cultural forces that are at work, the family dynamics that are at work, and then the sort of micro forces. What is going on that day? What is going on in that person's heart and mind? What milestones was that person trying to get to, or was frustrated from getting to? What is going on with friends? What is going on with loved ones, right? What is going on with substances? Why is all about psychology, right? So when folks bleat about why and we'll never know why, and I actually think the last time I looked at the poll, I think most people who voted said only the killer knows why. That always agitates me because it's so defeatist. No one will ever know why. Whenever I see that sort of thing, I wince. I sort of wince inwardly. A crime has been committed, hasn't it? A crime has been committed. So there is a why. Maybe you don't know what the why is. Maybe Ali don't know what the why is. Maybe the district attorney doesn't know what the why is. Maybe I think I know what the why is, but I don't know. But there is actually a why. It's just a question of getting to it. So this idea of we will never know. Well, actually, it's not rocket science. It's not some distant planet that we've yet to discover. We've discovered the why in countless true crime cases over and over and over again. This is another true crime case. In some ways, it's distinctive. In some ways, it's not distinctive. In some ways, we can carry over what we know from other cases into this case. So it's hardly an undiscovered territory, psychologically speaking. So it did happen, and it happened for a reason. And if you pay attention and you think in a systematic way and an integrated way rather than a fragmented way, for example, a fragmented way of thinking is someone plays a scream on YouTube. Oh, that's the scream. I wonder what happened here. Sorry, where did that scream come from? Is anyone else reporting on the scream? Is the mainstream media playing the scream? Did law enforcement get that scream? That's a fragmented way of thinking. Oh, you know what? I heard the scream on another channel. Did you? Did you really think about what you heard? Did that creator even talk about it? Right? So I always wince when this idea of we will never know. There's a lot that we do know that we just need to apply our minds, right? Not knowing the reason is, in a sense, an invitation for the same type of crime. So if you say, you know what, I don't know and we will never know, that is an invitation for the same type of crime to happen again. And we see that in a lot of these mass type situations, whenever a crime is committed, everyone says the same thing. We don't know what the motive is, when invariably the motive is actually very similar. Every time it happens, there's the same cricket sort of thing. Why did this happen? Every time it's the same fabric. Every time we ask the same question. So we are not going to strange new worlds that we've never gone to before. We've gone to strange new worlds before. The question is just how strange is this world? Is this world similar to other worlds we've traveled to, right? In terms of true crime. So we do need to try and figure out why, because it'll help us deal with the why in the next crime, right? In the same way that dealing with the why in a previous crime helps us to deal with the why in this crime, right? So perhaps we need to put in some effort into the why. So if you answered the question, do we know why this crime happened? If you answered it no, or you answered we will never know, that is part of what is agitating society. Is society doesn't know itself. Society doesn't know what it is afflicted with. Society doesn't know what is wrong with part of itself. And that's part of the problem of society. Because if you either in denial or in ignorance, or you're simply not asking that question, then that's going to continue. That situation is going to continue. If you've got an unhappy camper in your midst, can you still have a good time at summer camp? Or does it behove you to make sure everyone's happy? So we need to put some effort into the why. Just because you or I can't figure out why doesn't mean there isn't a why. Is that clear? let me put that in chat. So Marianne says, how can you know how a maniac thinks? Okay. I'll address that in a moment. Okay. Let me address that particular issue. How can you know how a maniac thinks? So that's the school of thought where you say a criminal is nothing like me. That's the school of thought where you say the person who committed this crime is, insert the label, psychopath, sociopath, narcissist, he's got this disorder, but whatever it is nothing like me. And so it's a madman, it's a monster, all of those kinds of things. You know what? That person wasn't a madman or a monster before they committed the crime. They weren't born a monster. Maybe you believe they were, but actually they weren't born a monster. It's only when they committed the crime that they suddenly became a monster. Otherwise, they fitted in quite well with society. People say that over and over again with a lot of criminals. Wow, he was such a nice guy. We all got along with him. No one had a problem with him. That's the problem. He was trying to be nice. He bottled it all up, right? Now, I do understand that a lot of true crime is about dealing with anxiety. And so if somebody tells you, guess what? Criminals actually come out of society. Criminals are actually nothing like you. They are you. You have the ability to be a criminal. You have all the things that can make a criminal, right? You can be overwhelmed. You can be what's the word? You can be stressed. Your anxiety can debilitate you. You can become addicted, and of course, you don't want to hear that because someone else is to blame here. It's not coming out of our society. It's not us. It's somebody else, and then it feels really good to say that person's guilty, that person's wrong, that person's to blame, and they are nothing like us, right? So to answer your question, and you're not going to like this, to answer your question, how can you know how a maniac thinks? Well, the one answer is, well, look inward, look inside yourself, and look at the things that overwhelm you and upset you, right? That's part of it. That's like the tar road of true crime, the tar road of true crime psychology. But human psychology, ordinary psychology, and an ordinary psychologist studying that is nothing like criminal psychology. Criminal psychology is like a dirt road, right? And if you haven't committed a crime, it's much harder to slow down and interrogate the subtleties of the dirt road of criminal psychology. But there is a way to do it, which is you go down lots of dirt roads through the psychologies of lots of other criminals. That's how you can know how what you refer to as the maniac thinks. I don't think the person who asked that question is probably even sticking around to hear the answer because they probably want a very black and white, simple answer. Criminal psychology is not like that. It is, it becomes like that, but it comes from another place where a person is living a life of lies, right? So I say this very often. Not all liars are murderers, but all murderers are liars. So for whatever reason, the murderer has been lying to himself about something. Maybe he assumed he was in a relationship. Maybe he assumed that he was going to go to college and have his fairy tale just like everyone else. Maybe he woke up and realized this is hell. I'm not getting what I deserve. If you look at the very last Instagram post Kaylee put up, she said something about it's so wonderful being surrounded by all of these people, and I've kind of got part of that image behind me. She was saying, how great it was to be surrounded with people that make her so happy. What if you not one of those people? What if you weren't happy? Well, all of these other people were. How does that feel? Feels pretty invalidating. And so it is quite interesting how something that can, just as much as something that can validate you, can also invalidate you, right? A person that can make you feel like $1 million when they accept you and love you and like you and are attracted to you, that same person can make you feel totally worthless when they see someone else that they like more than they like you, or they leave you for somebody else. But bear in mind what I'm saying, that thing that can validate you can just as easily invalidate you. As a YouTuber, I can tell you, to some extent, you look at your subscriber numbers and you think that gives an indication of who I am and my potency and my agency. Only that you later on you realize, if you're honest, that there are some creators out there who are idiots and they've got double the numbers you've got or 10 times the number you've got it. People that, let's put it this way, people that you don't respect at all are respected by others far more. And then what does that say about you? In other words, that thing that you think validates you, you realize doesn't. And that's pretty, in a way, depressing and humiliating, in a way, if you attach everything to that, right? And that's the part where you've got to be careful. You shouldn't attach your entire sense of who you are to anything. It should be attached to a value system and to standards, because those things don't change. People change their minds, cultures change their minds, contexts change, but values and standards don't necessarily change. Okay, let me get back to what I was talking about. So there is a why in this case, there is a who, and why will give you the who and who will give you the why. And time and context will help fit the rest of the fabric into place, right? So there is a who, and because there's a who, that person has a why. If you can find the why, you'll find the who. But the who will also give you the why, and time and context will help. Now, as hard as why seems to be, it's not hard at all, right? So for those of you who think this is a really, really difficult question, and by the way, I've sat through an entire murder trial, in fact, a murder trial of a triple axe murderer, right? That guy actually brushed by me at one point. We actually sort of brushed by me and we kind of had words briefly in court. But in terms of just this question, why, it seems like so difficult. And I've seen quite a few court cases where I've sat in those court cases and they've said, well, we're finding you guilty, but we still don't actually know why you did this. And why is actually no longer a legal, and hasn't been for quite a while, why is no longer a legal requirement to prove in these cases, only intention. But why does help. Knowing why someone does help does address the feeling that a judge or jurors may feel, which is, I understand that there's proof that someone did something, but what I don't understand is why they did it. And that's important that you do. It's important that you do understand, but the law doesn't prescribe that, which is quite interesting, right? Yeah, that's a good point. We also know when. That's also important. I think that is, I don't think that's the case. It seems to come up, someone always says that it's part of some much bigger thing. Anyway, so as hard as the why seems to be, it's not really hard at all. The why is around us all day, every day. When last did you feel overwhelmed by anything? I touched on this a moment ago. When the shadow of the pandemic was passing through town, almost like a circus, and some people behaved very rationally and some people behaved very irrationally. Some people made certain extreme statements that you may have agreed with, and some people made other extreme statements maybe that you didn't agree with. The pandemic passed through town kind of like a dark Santa, and instead of leaving behind gifts, it left behind, in a way, curses, right? but it found its way across the planet. And then the question was, how did you respond? Some people responded appropriately. Thanks a lot, Karina. Thanks so much. Some of us responded appropriately to the pandemic. Some didn't. And others will say, well, who can say what is appropriate? Well, that's exactly what you apply to true crime. Some people respond to life appropriately for a while or for the course of their lives. Some people respond appropriately to their lives until a certain thing happens, then they don't, and then they commit a crime. And then they're a maniac, right? Right? So that's the same thing. It is the point at which you, it's almost like, those plastic rulers, you can bend them to like a large extent, and then at a certain point they break. Every person has got a psychological inflection point as well. You can be in a marriage, you can be in a relationship with someone that you love and they love you, but then just add enough uncertainty, burden, anxiety, stress to that marriage, and that marriage will eventually break, even if there's plenty of love. The same applies to any relationship, but the same also applies to the relationship someone has with obeying the law. Apply enough stress, uncertainty, anxiety, and all these other things, and it's going to test your ability to remain moral and to respond in the appropriate way, right? Sally says, I believe the killer thought he only had two options. I think there's some truth to that, in the sense that I think he was facing a social death and his response was to do what he did. But, and I mean, you could be dealing with a Elliot Rodger type person here who goes out in his mind a blaze of glory, right? And then also dies. Of course, in this case, the person hasn't, but there is a danger that he still might, hence this. There is a danger that he's still out there and he's not finished. That's definitely kind of what some people are thinking. Okay, I'll kind of return to some of your questions in a moment. I just want to get through this. So we spoke about the pandemic, and I said some responded better than others, some responded worse than others. But the pandemic was quite a good, just a basic test of your ability to deal with something that you don't like. If you don't agree with something, do you act out? Are you a problem to your fellow man? Do you sort of go with the flow? Or do you kick up a big fuss? And like a good way of asking this question is, when the pandemic happened, did you was it harder on you than on everybody else? Right? Or was it easier on you than everybody else? Because that's kind of how true crime happens, or crimes happen, is someone is dealing with the same thing everyone else is, to some extent, not exactly, but a similar set of circumstances, more or less, not exactly, and for whatever reason, they just can't deal with it. And then they take that option, right? Which is maladaptive. A crime happens because someone has run out of appropriate responses. It represents a sort of breakdown in constructive or adaptive responses, and instead the killer turns into a killer. And he's probably thought about it. He's probably thought, what would be such an easy way out of this? What would be such a clean, easy, and permanent solution to this mess that I'm in would be to do this. Now, obviously, I'm talking here in generalizations. We're going to get to a narrower explication of the why, but we need to first ground ourselves in the right psychology, right? Some of you are going to be bored with that, and some of you are going to say, well, I don't have time for that. But it is a process to get down into that dark place, right? to realize it exists, and there's a general version of it, and then there's the specific version of it. The general version you can probably, and I want to invite you to see how it resonates with you, and that should be quite scary to say, jeepers, I'm aware of those feelings, I'm aware of those thoughts, right? So where you have a breakdown in constructive or adaptive responses, that's what can turn someone into a killer. So you can look at the same thing in your life. If you have difficulties with a certain thing, whether it's a person, whether it's finances, whether it is a complicated situation, and you run out of patience to deal with it, you lose the ability to deal with it in a step-by-step, rational, proper way. In other words, you want to cheat the process. You are so frustrated that you just want to get out of it. That is showing that you are struggling to adapt, and you are either going to break down, you might get sick, or you might hurt somebody. And that's when you've got to recognize it in yourself, but you can also recognize it in somebody else, and make sure that that tension stops escalating. You can say, well, I recognize that I'm really overwhelmed, stressed, tired, whatever it is. Well, I'm going to take steps to make sure this escalating situation de-escalates. I can take charge of that. That can be one of your chosen responses. Another chosen response can be, I choose not to respond, or I choose how to respond. I don't just react. It's not just a reptilian thing, which is what social media teaches. Social media is like, share, subscribe, hit that button, da 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 da. What about interrogating what you're doing? What about a thought process between those reptilian responses? And that's what the algorithm feeds, is that sense of addiction and of thinking in a zombie-like way, thinking in a non-thinking way, right? That is also how crimes happen. You are programmed ultimately, and then you just execute the program. Does that make sense to say that? That a criminal is actually just executing what ends up being his own programming. And he somehow, somewhere forgot to interrogate, interrupt, intercept that programming, and at some point say, this is not a good line of code that I've accepted here, right? That's a good point. Not graduating with your class can make you feel like you've dropped out. Did somebody drop out of college? In this case, Lovely Sphinx says, this case is giving me the creeps. That's not really very helpful to say that. He's a psycho creep. He's a student. He had attachments to other people. By separating that person from you is not going to help answer why. Okay, let's bring it back up to that. Okay. So he gives into destructive impulses, and adaptation caves into reaction. So in other words, your sophisticated arsenal of responses becomes increasingly less sophisticated. Think of it as you're having a conversation with someone that has a difference of opinion, and that difference of opinion escalates to disagreement. The disagreement escalates to insults. The insults escalate to shouting, and the shouting escalates to physical arguing, right? So a physical tussle. So in other words, you've gone from the fairly sophisticated mechanism where you argue, or you have a conversation, you have a dialogue, you have an exchange using words, using communication. It then devolves to actually hurting someone physically. Now think about that very basic analogy for the breakdown, the devolution, the opposite of the evolution or building up, the breaking down, the devolution of all your coping strategies and the way that you would normally deal with someone. It goes from talking to physical talking. And that's probably what happened here as well. The perpetrator probably at a certain point talked to someone or tried to talk to someone, and then that didn't really work. And so this is a more forceful form of talking, to put it mildly. Thanks a lot, Sharon. Thanks a lot for that. Okay. So it is giving into the destructive impulses. Have you ever argued with someone and wanted to slap someone or whatever? Well, you have that impulse, but you give into it. You know you shouldn't. You know it's not right, and then you don't give into it. But some people do, and then you give into it more and more. It's a destructive impulse that you either say, I recognize that I'm not going to do it, or you say, you know what, I think it's actually justified. I'm going to step over that line. And I might not just slap that person, I might push them as well. I'm actually really angry, so I'm going to do something besides that as well. That's giving in to those destructive impulses. And I think all of us have at a certain point. You give in to one, which allows you to give into another one. You didn't just get to the end one, it started off with the first one. It's like the thing of you start off telling one little lie, one little white lie, and it ends up becoming something much bigger. Okay, so the response to something that is impinging on the perpetrator is no longer negotiation or bargaining or some sort of transaction. In the same way that I was talking about a conversation, it's giving up on that process, but also wanting to come out on top of a self-defeating mechanism. So murder is kind of quick and easy. It's a quick and easy escape from complicated problems. It's a quick and easy solution from the original bind, but it's also cheating. It's forcing a particular outcome, or it's using force to bring about an instant outcome where you come out on top, right? The perpetrator rids himself of a gnawing problem where if someone has made that person feel invalid, well, now I've gotten the best of you, I've gotten on top of you, the invalidation is now gone in that moment, perhaps. But he doesn't quite achieve the agency he wants. Instead, in a real sense, so in this sense, you've got a quadruple murderer. And so the reality is, if he walked out of that house feeling like you didn't, you can't insult me again, or you can't invalidate me again. Well, not quite. You're now going to go through life, and the reality is you kill these people, and their deaths are now hanging over you for the rest of your life, and that's not going to go away. These people that were, maybe you didn't like them so much at college, you could probably have forgotten about them in 5 years. Well, now you're going to remember them for the rest of your life, right? So in terms of this idea that you trying to force a situation where you regain agency, by doing that, by cheating the system, by making a cultural violation, by breaking the law, you actually give up your agency entirely. And someone typically does that when they feel like they've got nothing to lose, where it feels like to them, they've already lost their agency anyway. So it's almost like, what do I have to lose if I do this? Actually everything, but it feels like I've lost everything. Actually, you haven't. You still have freedom in your life, and you can still turn over a new leaf and have another chapter. You're young. But because it feels like that and it feels so strongly, well, I want instant relief. I want my agency back immediately. And you commit the crime and you do have that agency back. These people that have taken it away are now gone, except the problem is you are now a criminal. So actually, technically, you are someone who's out there who doesn't have agency. You do until you're caught, then you don't. But technically, temporarily, put it that way, you have some agency. In the real world, knowing what you've done, you've actually lost your agency forever. Hilly P says this guy was definitely that. Do you think that he hated all women? That's definitely become a word that I think it's the new favorite word. So in true crime, it used to be psychopath, then it was sociopath, then it was, I think, narcissist. Now I think it's misogynist. I think that's the new favorite word for someone you don't like. If you've got a gripe with a particular individual, does that mean you've got a gripe with that entire group of individuals? So if I look at another true crime creator, does it mean, and I'm not happy with what they're doing, does it mean I hate the entire genre, or I hate every single true crime creator? Or does it mean that particular person I'm not really happy with? So if it was a misogynist, why didn't they kill all the women in that house? So you've got to be careful making absolute statements, and also what you're doing when you make that statement. Let me see if I can bring it back up. I think that's a better explanation. I just want to bring that up again. It means someone who hates women in general. It's funny that there's not a word for men who hate men. But anyway, I just want to see if I can find that again. Why am I struggling to find it? Tamara says, do you think he justified his actions? I think he felt justified. I think his feelings made him feel, I want to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm doing this. The fact that he didn't kill one person but four means that that feeling of intention was pretty strong. I'm going to do one thing 4 times. I'm not sorry after doing something once. I'm not sorry after doing something twice. So, but I think feelings are a big part of this. So saying someone's a psychopath, so they don't have any feelings, no, feelings are a big part of this story. Anyway, I wanted to put up that comment about misogyny. In true crime, I've said this as long as I've been covering the genre, there's a fixation, a focus, a narrow-minded obsession with giving people labels in true crime. And what that does is it robs you of figuring out who a person is, right? And I always balk at that. I always say, even if your label is right, and it's probably not right, you need to not think about true crime through labels. You need to not think, he's a misogynist, he's a sociopath, he's a that, because even if you're right, it doesn't tell you anything about anything. It just gives you a sense of false satisfaction that you know what this is about. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I was thinking about this discussion earlier today, and what I'm going to say is quite cerebral, but I was thinking about why we struggle with why there's so much inauthenticity and so much difficulty with why. And I think that the reason is it's not just true crime, it's a kind of failure in every person. And it is this idea that if you think about the early discoverers who went out into the world and they would see a flower that had never been seen before, or an animal that had never been seen before. And what they would do is they would maybe draw the flower or whatever, and then they would give it a name, and they would feel, we've discovered that flower or that animal, right? By giving it a name, by giving it a label, it feels like you have captured it, or you found it, or you know what it is. But that is as simplistic and stupid as if you come onto this channel and you've never seen me before, right? And I say, my name is Nick, and you're like, I know everything now about it. I know what your backstory is. I know absolutely everything about you. Thank you. Your name's Nick. Great. And then you can click away. No, you don't know anything. You just know my name. The same applies to you telling me your name, or me telling you my dog's name, right? Anything, a glass of water, if you can see it, a bottle of water, a pen, a piece of paper, a book, like this book, is far more than a name. This shirt isn't just shirt. It's a color, and it's the cotton that it's made of, and the branding that goes into it as well. And so to reduce a crime to a name, so you could also say, okay, so John Smith committed this crime. Okay, so now we know who it is and we know what happened. No, you don't. If I say my dog's name's Timmy, you don't know anything about it. You don't know what this dog is like. You don't know his temperament. You don't know anything about it, right? And that whole idea of I'm an explorer going out into the world, and here's a flower that's never been seen before by anybody. Well, let's call it, let's call it a red dotted iris. Okay, so that's what that flower is. No, it's not. That flower has a certain relationship with its community. Certain insects pollinate that flower, and it needs a certain kind of soil and a certain amount of sunlight and all that kind of thing. You only know that stuff through effort, through extended study, through intelligence, and through a lot of painful, precise work, right? And so this idea that you just get a name and that suddenly bestows upon you expertise, no, it doesn't. Not at all, right? And I think we approach this the wrong way around. Like in true crime, we want to say it was this crime, or it was this kind of killer, whatever. It was, I think in this case, that happened when they said it's a targeted killing. We want to rush to judgment because we hate a vacuum. Even law enforcement do, right? So we are programmed to hate uncertainty. It gives us an anxiety, but then we also cheat that process by giving ourselves instant answers that actually don't mean anything, but it gives us a sense that those are answers. A little bit like you meet someone and they say I love you, and you say great, let's get married. Actually, you need a little bit more information. Those words potentially could be very important, but they could also potentially mean absolutely nothing. So you need to spend more time beyond the words, getting to know all the systems and dynamics. And just as there's a big cosmology of things going on in who you are, in your being, where you are almost like this incredible clockwork of stars and constellations that make up who you are, all the patterns that make up your habits and thoughts and programming. The same applies to a criminal. The same applies to a criminal in his swarm of people that surround him. So to say he's a creep is a little bit like taking a pen, right, and saying, this is what we don't want to know about that person. Basically, everything. We don't want to know anything about him. It's a creep, and let's hope they catch him. That's how you don't catch him, right? It's by going carefully through these steps that you figure out who someone is. But the first part is you've got to acknowledge it's quite a elaborate dynamic. It's not simple. It's not a label, right? And if I had to leave true crime today or tomorrow and never come back, I would hope my epitaph would be true crime is not a label, or keep labels out of true crime. That would be, I hope, my legacy. That stop simplifying who people are, the criminals and their victims, to a label. Because that's what's wrong with our societies. We treat each other with the same superficial attitude. and we are deep people, criminals also feel deeply and symbolically. So it's quick and easy within the scheme of a crime to do something, but of course there's the aftermath as well. So a criminal, just what I've said now, you can draw a line through everything that is so complicated to deal with. The problem is, sorry, the shit of life is going to follow you. The investigation is going to follow these actions. The aftermath is going to be dragged like this umbilicus with all the things that is associated with it wherever you go. So this quick and instant solution that you wanted, unfortunately, is a very long, arduous, painful problem that you're going to be dragging with you, right? In other words, this idea of something being quick and easy is a fairy tale. It's a illusion. The label thing is an illusion. So where we are now, a crime has been committed, and you can just move on to Christmas, the new year, and probably the killer wants to do the same thing. He wants to move on, but a crime has been committed. The same applies to everyone else, whether crime has been committed or not. You want to fix a problem quickly and easily, but now you've got a bigger problem that's slow and difficult and won't go away. How do you deal with that problem? So all of that, believe it or not, was a broad introduction to two specific areas I'm now going to deal with. The one is the intertextuality of why, and then the other one we'll deal with is the number 3 clue we've all missed. So we'll see if you guys stick around for that one. The number 3 clue that we all missed is really narrowing down what I believe is a big part of the why in terms of this case. Okay, so we're going to deal with that. Yeah, Rika says slow-moving storm. Rika, I've actually got a comment of yours that I'm probably going to highlight. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, so let's kind of get into that now. Jodi Arias, O.J. Simpson, the murder of Meredith Kercher, Henry van Breda is a triple axe murderer, Patrick Frazee. I've written multiple books about all of them except Patrick Frazee. I've only written one book about him. But in all of these cases, we saw extremely bloody, extremely gratuitously bloody crime scenes, right? Or are you guys familiar with at least one of those names, one of those crimes? Kathy, thanks very much. Thanks a lot for that. Annie says, I do not believe this was a student. I do. So if I go through those names again, O.J. Simpson, Jodi Arias, the murder of Meredith Kercher, Henry van Breda, Patrick Frazee. As I said, I've written books about all of those cases. I think I've written trilogies or more about 4 of those cases. So I really know them inside out. But do you guys know at least one of those cases to know just how bloody those crime scenes were? Right? Because you get some crime scenes that are unfathomably brutal and bloody. And then you get others where there's not a drop of blood, such as the Chris Watts case. The Chris Watts case is extremely sadistic and nasty and ugly and unpleasant, but it looks like there's not a drop of blood spilled. And then you'll have another case like the murder of Kelsey Bereth, Patrick Frazee's fiance, which is unfathomably bloody and terrible. In fact, when I went from the Chris Watts case to the Patrick Frazee case, it sort of felt like even though one person had died, the way that she had died was so horrible and terrible. It felt like it was a match for 3 people having died. Just that. I know it's not technically true, but it felt like that. I'm MCM says, what are the titles of your books? I think the best thing is just go to Amazon and you can look around there. You can look around at the author page. So I'll just put that up for you. But yeah, in terms of Jody, in terms of O.J. Simpson, I wrote Juice. In terms of Jodi Arias, all the titles end in like audacity, mendacity, obscenity, etc., and so on. So I'll just put you can kind of go through that on your own time. That's the link to it. Okay. So anyway, you had kind of the sense of gratuitously bloody crime scenes in all 5 of those cases. Jodi Arias, extremely bloody. O.J. Simpson, there's almost like blood streaming out onto the sidewalk. Meredith Kircher, also. Henry van Breda, I'm not even going to tell you what they spoke about, blood coming down the stairs like a waterfall. And that was his own family members. Patrick Frazee, especially disturbing. And then you have the John Benet Ramsey case, where you also have gratuitous overkill, right? What happened to her was like totally over the top, yet almost no sign of blood. Not no blood, but almost no sign of blood. What's the difference? And why is any crime gratuitous? So now we're going to start drilling down into criminal psychology. And you're either going to come with me on that journey, or you're going to be like, it's too much concentration. I can't concentrate on this. I need an instant answer here. Well, it's not instant. You've got to go through this process, right? So let me ask again, what is the difference between one crime where there's lots of blood and another crime where there's no blood? Why is any crime gratuitous? Like, why would one crime be really gratuitous? Let's say the Jodi Arias case. And then you have another case, let's say Scott Peterson, where there's not lots of blood and it seems, I don't want to say it's not gratuitous, but it feels less gratuitous somehow. It's less obvious. There's something more subtle in the. So that's quite a good point. SW5 plus says overkill indicates passion. That's a great, very simple assessment there. Well done. Sally Vella says emotion. Zoe says it's more personal. Right? So can you see already we're shifting closer to where we need to go? I mean, we've started off with just one word, really. And we get that word by associating this crime with other crimes. It's got a very fancy sounding name. And like, I don't know what that's about. It's called true crime intertextuality. It sounds like this big deal. It's simply looking at the fabric of one case and comparing it to the fabric of another case. And so what do you do when you do that? Well, you come out with a very simple insight. Those were gratuitous. This is gratuitous. What does the gratuitous aspect tell us? Well, it tells us something was personal about this. Someone was passionate about this. Someone was involved in some way, right? And I did think about that while preparing for this. Is the Jodi Arias case about rage? I think there's rage is part of it. It's not only rage, it's also fear. Jodi Arias was about to be broken up with. Her boyfriend was about to go to Cancun with somebody else. Right next to that rage is fear or insufficiency, right? Anger, at least, is a actifying or activating feeling, right? whereas fear is where you are pressed downwards. And so rage is maybe what gets you out of your fear. Who knows? But it's not just rage. In the same way, don't make the mistake of labeling something with just one emotion. It's the same thing. There could be quite a few emotions. Okay. So I want to just show you the dictionary definition of gratuitous. So I'm a kind of a wordsmith. I've written quite a few books, and so I'm quite into this sort of thing. Gratuitous, what does it mean? Done without good reason. Doesn't it feel like 4 students knifed to death, 4 beautiful, lively, wonderful, seeming to be nice people? It was uncalled for because it's gratuitous violence. Also, the way that they were killed, such an unpleasant, bloody, the way that this happened is just so unnecessarily pleasant and unpleasant and bloody. Not that murder is ever pleasant or without blood, but this is particularly unpleasant. Other words, unjustified, without reason, unwarranted, unprovoked, right? Do you think that the killer would say the same thing, that it was unprovoked? It's also, and this is not really what we're talking about, but it's also voluntary. Gratuitous means voluntary, unpaid, complimentary, right? But that's all of that is not really getting us where we want to go. None of these synonyms really address the heart of what we're talking about. So what is it that we're talking about? Well, we're talking about that. What is gratuitous behavior? It's not necessary or without a cause, and there it refers to gratuitous sex. It's almost like you can expect to see a relationship between gratuitous sex and gratuitous violence, right? And don't you often see movies that are like that way? That are that way. But to me, when you're asking what is gratuitous behavior, the simplest answer is just these words. It's too much. It's in a single word, excessive. So where we are now is we are coming into the fabric of this case, and we're saying, what are we talking about in terms of the vibe of the person who committed this crime, right? And we're saying it's gratuitous, but we're saying, well, what does that mean? There's gratuitous violence, yes, that's a label. What does that actually mean? Well, there's too much of something going on. Okay, too much of something going on. Too much what? And then you say, what we are dealing with here, kind of in sum, is something that is excessive, or there's excess of something. And then you've got to answer that question, excess of what? There's excess of what going on in a college town, right? That's the fabric we're dealing with. We're dealing with a college town, a university students. All the victims are university students. Everyone in that house were university students. They were in a party central aspect. So what is going on that's too much? What is going on that is excessive? And then you do have excessive stab wounds, but I'm saying besides that, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on that is gratuitous? What's going on that is too much? What's going on that is excessive? So there it is right at the end. Something that is too much is excessive. And now we're coming a little closer to what we need to be addressing. What in student society would you say, this is in broad strokes still, what in student society, and if you're a student, you should know this. If you've got kids who are students, you should know this. What would you say is generally, classically excessive? What I'm trying to say, I'm not saying it's too much for them. I'm saying we tend from the outside to look at that and say, that's a bit much for us. it's fine when you're in college, but that's a bit much for us outside of college, out of those party situations. And I think one of the simple answers to that is you could say there's kind of an excess of parties. And could you just say that on its own, that this house is a party house, that this house partied excessively? And what's quite interesting with the report that Ashley Banfield gave, I think I'll play it again in a moment. She said the house was really quiet that night. It was unusually quiet that night. Let me play that again. That's this clip over here.
That night, said she didn't need to. And she also, for a Saturday night on a block often teeming with parties and college kids. One neighbor said that she normally sleeps with earplugs, but that night said she didn't need to. And she also said when police came to her door the next day, she simply told them she hadn't heard anything that had alarmed her during the night. Another neighbor described the quiet as bizarre. He also told the news.
So can you see something weird was going on that night, not just at that house, but kind of more broadly speaking? It was like, why is there not a party going on in that house that night when it was a party house? Why were parties going on in other places, but not at that house that night? Is there no reason, or is there actually a reason for that? They say it was, bear in mind, this was a Saturday night, and it seems like everyone in that house went to a party. Why didn't they have a party in the house like they normally did? The answer might be, well, they had the night before. It's possible. But there could also be some other reason. Is it? And I think where one needs to look at is, what is the last party held at that house, and what happened during that last party? Let me say that again. I think what they need to look at is the very last party that was held at 1122 King Road, and what happened during that party. What could have gone wrong for someone at that house during the last party or second last party? And then also ask the question, was there a reason that you guys didn't party on that last weekend? I mean, there was a big game, there was a reason to party. Were there better parties in other places? Was there no real answer, or is there an answer to that? Because the interesting thing is, someone came from somewhere else, perhaps another party, and brought some of whatever that was into the house. So if you think about it in a very weird way, there wasn't a party in that house that night, that weekend. And yet, nevertheless, someone came into that house, and in terms of a true crime thing, as objectionable as this is to say, had a kind of a party, a crime fest, a bloodbath, right? Can you see how that there's a link? There's a link potentially in that. That's also true. Okay, so let's continue. What happens within the context of student life that is prototypically too much compared to, say, kids at school or someone living the life of a married person? Any idea? What is, sorry, I've misspelled that. Can I delete that? Let me just put it up again with the right spelling. Prototypically. Prototypically. Prototypically, yeah. The Humble Grower says, was the killer excited? SM Kavalinsky says, partying, drinking. Yvonne says, party payback. But what is prototypically too much compared to, say, kids at school. Now, what I'm trying to say is it's not too much within a university setting. It's too much if you're not in that university setting. Okay. What I'm trying to get at, any idea, I mean, what I'm trying to get at is what is starting to feel gratuitous about this community, but specifically the victims? Where's a gratuitous aspect in that? And I suppose one way to go through that is you could look at their social media. Is there something gratuitous about the social media? Is there something that stands out about the social media? It's important to have an idea because people go to university with the expectation in anticipation of some of that gratuitous stuff. So what stuff is that? So if someone went to college with the expectation of something gratuitous happening, and then it didn't happen, what does that feel like? I want the gratuitous stuff, but I'm not getting it. What is that stuff? So there is a reason for the gratuitous violence in Idaho, right? And are we starting to deal with why directly, right? There is a reason for the gratuitous violence. It's linked to the gratuitous mirror on the other side, right? There's this gratuitous stuff going on, but what happens if I can't participate in the gratuitous stuff? I want some of that gratuitous. I want to enjoy some of that gratuitous stuff. People sometimes watch gratuitous violence in movies and they enjoy it. That they get a kind of a release. Like, I'm frustrated, I wouldn't mind slapping my boss. This movie where people get beaten up, I'm enjoying the gratuitous violence, right? But the other things that you might enjoy gratuitously as well. What happens when you can't enjoy those things gratuitously, or other people are enjoying it, but you can't? It might be food. It might be, thanks a lot, AES. It might be that someone is getting money and cars and whatever from their folks at varsity, but you not. And so because you have all those things, you can be gratuitous. You can have these big parties. But what if you aren't getting pocket money and you've failed your studies, and dad has said, well, I'm cutting you off. I told you if you don't pass, you're not getting another cent out of me. So what does it feel like if one side is having this gratuitous experience that they like, and then someone else expects to have that gratuitous experience and wants to, but they can't because they're not allowed to, or whatever the reason is, but they're frustrated from that. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. Someone says chat is fascinating. Merger says, what does gratuitous mean? Must I put that link up again? That's what it means. That's the meaning of gratuitous. Thanks a lot, Marcus. Marcus says, thanks for the live. Thanks a lot. Glad you're appreciating it. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is there's too much going on. There's something excessive going on. There's this gratuitous thing taking place in the student setting, right? And that is mirrored by the crime itself. And then you've got to ask, but how are they linked together? You already, some of you may have an inkling, but I said we're going to look away for our answers. So let's do that. We're going to look back to it in a moment. But let's look away for the answer to the link with Jodi Arias. Now, you may apply the same arguments here to Jodi Arias. Why would someone who just broke up with her boyfriend do this? So obviously we know in hindsight what happened with Jodi Arias, but we also know that Jodi Arias's crime was incredibly gratuitous. It was the violence was totally over the top. The judge actually said that, I don't know if I even want to say this, but let me just say it in a fairly neutral way. The judge said that the injury to Travis's neck was extremely severe, but he was also stabbed in other places. He was also shot, right? But you might say, I think what you're saying is absolute bullshit. In the Jodi Arias case, why would someone who just broke up with someone else murder someone? People break up all the time. Why would someone do something incredibly harsh and incredibly violent? People break up all the time. When I broke up with my boyfriend, I wasn't all that upset, or he wasn't that upset, or whatever it is. So you know, I don't think there's anything to that. Actually, there is. What were Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander doing that was gratuitous? Because they were doing something. I know, because I wrote a couple of books about it. What was going on between Jodi and Travis that is the one side of the gratuitous mirror? Because the other side was a gratuitous murder. And by the way, Jodi murdered Travis immediately after they did something gratuitously. So what do you think that other thing is? The question is there a link between the gratuitous violence and gratuitous something else? And with Jodi Arias, we see it right there. They gratuitously do something, and then there's a gratuitous murder, like literally immediately afterwards. But they'd been doing other things gratuitously before that as well. It wasn't just on that day. So you might say it just doesn't make any sense. Well, I've written several books on Jodi Arias. I've seen the crime scene photos. I don't know if you have. I'm not going to show them here. But even the post-mortem photos are like singed in my brain of Travis. I'm not going to repeat them here except to say, take my word for it, the violence on Travis was gratuitous. It was vicious, which is why it was such a high-profile case and why people thought she deserved the death penalty and why so many people hated Jodi Arias. When the judge read out the verdict, she emphasized the extreme cruelty of the crime. In other words, Jodi could have killed Travis, but she could have killed him with a single bullet because she had a gun. Instead, it was extremely cruel. Now, what is the reason for that? And I think it's actually quite obvious. When you know her story, when you looked into her diary, it's actually quite obvious. And the obvious clue is in the word cruel. Why was it so cruel? Simple answer. Because Jodi felt what was being done to her was emotional cruelty, was emotionally cruel. You might say lots of people have been broken up with and they've felt it's cruel or unkind or unfair. Like I say, some people can deal with those things appropriately and adaptively and properly, and some people can't. If you don't have any money and something happens that is adding insult to injury, you know, you've lost your job and your boyfriend breaks up with you, it can be much harder to deal with. So it's not just that single event, it's all the things around it. If you've really pinned your hopes on something or someone and given certain things up and made sacrifices, and then that person leaves you in a shallow way, it can also feel extremely cruel. Candace says, yours is the only account I've been able to process. Thanks, Candace. I'm not sure which books you're referring to. Is that the Jodi Arias books? Penny says, I was fascinated with her case. So there's a simple situation where it's just someone who thought she was in a relationship with someone that committed this vicious, cruel, over the top, very, very bloody, unnecessary, unwarranted. It feels like it was unprovoked, unjustified, uncalled for, done without good reason, gratuitous crime. Just because someone felt, I thought you loved me. And then you say, but we've all felt that that can't be the answer. Yeah, but it's how this person responded to that same situation we've all been in. And that is why you can't apply the tar road of your experience in ordinary psychology. You can apply the beginning of it, but then you've got to go off that tar road and slow the fuck down and go into the dirt road. And you've got to use a different vehicle. And that is intertextuality and a few other things, identity, context, timing, and other things as well, to figure out what is going on with this particular person, because this person is a little bit different to the rest of us. Similar in some ways, but also different in many ways. So in their case, Jody and Arius, Travis was in the process of breaking up with Jody and was about to take a romantic trip to Cancun with someone else, someone new. Any intertextuality there with this case? He was in the process of breaking up with someone. So you can also look at the relationship status of Madison. Was she in the process of breaking up with Jack? I don't think so, but I guess it's possible. Kaylee, was she in the process of breaking up with anyone or in the process of getting back with anyone? Seems actually likely because of everyone in that house, her status was the most uncertain. And then was someone about to take a trip with somebody else? Well, Kaylee had just left to get her car. And I think they were about to take a trip somewhere. I mean, this time is all about taking a trip for Thanksgiving or for Christmas. And what does that mean when you do that? When you say, I'm going to go on a romantic trip or I'm going to go on any trip with someone and I'm not taking you. What it means, I'm not part of that fairy tale. I'm not part of your plan. And that's clear. And that's the finish line of our relationship. That's the final thing. Kat says she had broken up, we're told, with Jack, but we were also told that she might be getting back together with him. So these are possible aspects in the fabric of Jodi Arias's life with Travis that maybe you can apply here and maybe you can't. Maybe they're relevant here and maybe they're not. Maybe some of it's relevant, maybe it isn't. But can you see how useful it is going into another case to get your insights in terms of aspects that we just don't know at this point? Go to cases where we do know the patterns and the executions and see what matches here. One of the questions you kind of got to ask is, was Travis a student? Answer, no, but he was sort of teaching in a way. He was sort of living a student lifestyle. There were other people living in his house. Was Jodi Arias a student? She was kind of a student of Mormonism, but technically I think you could say, no, they actually weren't students. So then I think you've got to say, let's go and look at a case where there are students, they're at university, and there's a gratuitous murder in the middle of it. And guess which case that is? The murder of Meredith Kircher. Amanda Knox was a student during that time. Her boyfriend was a student during that time. The victim was a student during that time. The other people who lived in that house were students at that time, besides Philomena and Laura. They weren't, but the others were. The Humble Grower says, is the white car a clue? I think it's an important clue. So again, if you say, you know what, someone broke up with me and I never cut their throat. Yes, but this isn't about what you did or you. This isn't about labels, or this is about move yourself out the way and let's look at someone else. Let's look at this flower that we've just found and not give it a name. Let's find out about this flower. What kind of soil does it grow in? What kind of insects are drawn to it? Let's find out about the flower beyond just giving it a name and saying, okay, now we know that it's a flower. Get yourself out of the way, get the labels out the way, and find out this isn't about you, it's about them. Who are these people, not you saying who these people are. So if we say there's a mirror to gratuitous violence, and we say what Jody did to Travis was gratuitous, what was the mirror there? What was going on excessively, gratuitously, and then suddenly cut off, suddenly at a dead end? And that is exactly the same question you ask of this case. You say, oh, in this case, what was going on excessively, gratuitously, and then suddenly cut off, suddenly at a dead end? Well, one thing you can say for sure is the timing of it. Kaylee was about to leave college forever. Kaylee, in fact, had just sort of left and she came back with her car. Something that was about to end was the whole college experience, certainly for two of the victims. Now, am I right or wrong when I say this? Wasn't Kaylee 21 years old? Wasn't Maddie 21 years old? Weren't the two girls on the top floor both 21 and they were about to leave college? They were about to leave university. Am I right in saying that? Robert says, do you guys think the police have a suspect? I think they do. I think there is someone or a handful of people that they are looking at more closely. Yeah, Brits Creek says the girls downstairs were younger. Yeah, that's exactly right. College life was about to end. So let me ask you another question. Xana and Ethan, were they 20 or 21? Were the girls on the third floor older or the same age to Xana and Ethan? So the way I know it, the way I understand it, the girls on the top floor were both 21 and that was their final year. And those on the middle floor they weren't done at university. They were 20 years old and they would continue whatever was going on, right? Yeah, so that's how I understand it. Xana and Ethan 20, those on the top floor 21, and basically they'd reached the end of their time at college, right? So if you and again, I don't know this for a fact, it's what I think I know, but if you accept that, then isn't it addressing this whole question where you say, what is going to suddenly be cut off? What is going to suddenly be at a dead end? Well, isn't the answer Kaylee was suddenly going to no longer be at college? Maddie was suddenly going to no longer be at college. And so someone that was connected with them also is going to be cut off. They were going to go on some, just like with Jodi Arias and Travis. Travis was about to go somewhere with someone else. And that was going to spell the end of Jodi Arias's life, existence with Travis, through Travis. So isn't that exactly what's going on here? And doesn't that also suggest that the targets were either Maddie or Kaylee because they were older, because it was coming to an end? Isn't that another way of figuring that part out? So it looks like some of us have learned something here. That was just how I understood it. Kaylee and Maddie are 21, Ethan and Zane are 20. That one here can make a really big difference. Someone who comes into university in their first year, their status is totally different to someone who is a senior, someone who's coming to the end. The same applies at school. The status when you're at that age is totally different. And it feels like you're a big deal, or it feels like you're not a big deal. Okay. In Jodi Arias's case, she didn't only stab her victim, she also shot him. That's gratuitous. But the stabbing itself, even if she didn't shoot him, was gratuitous. The bullet wound, I believe, was post-mortem, and that complicates the understanding of the cause and potentially the manner of death. But when you see that and understand that, you can see how one thing can lead to another, even in the mere execution of a crime. So Jodi Arias stabbing someone and then shooting that same person, that is a situation of one gratuitous act leads to another. Do you know where I'm going with that particular comment? Do you know what I'm suggesting with that particular comment? So in the Jodi Arias case, one gratuitous act leads to another. How do you think that applies in this case? So in her case, it's using a knife and then also using a gun. In this case, I don't think that's what happened. It's just somebody using a knife. But how does one gratuitous act lead to another? That's what we're asking. Did one murder lead to another murder? Because that's how gratuitous works. In Idaho, I personally doubt whether the killer went to the house with the motive of killing 4 people. So someone has just asked that question. What was the motive? Brian W., what was the motive? I don't think the motive was, I want to go to this house and kill 4 people. I don't think that was the motive. It's a possible motive, but I don't think that's the motive here. He may have intended to kill just one, and he may also have intended to kill 2. The 2 girls on the top floor. But I don't think he intended to kill Ethan and Xana, who were a year younger and on a different floor. I don't think that was part of the plan. When you understand that he meant to kill one person, but things got complicated and one thing led to another, one killing, one murder led to another, the crime isn't actually so hard to understand at all. If you just look at it like that, one gratuitous act leads to another, then it's not such a hard crime to understand at all. In fact, you are almost thinking of this as the murder of one person, which just leads to the murder of another and another and another, right? Essentially, what you may be dealing with here is one murder and then one gratuitous act leads to another. But that's also telling you something about the kind of person you're dealing with, because the other side of it is they didn't really have to kill another person. After they killed the second person, they didn't absolutely have to kill the next person. You kind of get this sense that maybe, although they didn't have to, they wanted to. We see precisely that scenario play out in the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, right? Do you think the killer really wanted to kill Ron Goldman in that case? Do you think the killer had ever met Ron Goldman or even knew who he was? One gratuitous act leads to another. So the murder of Nicole Brown Simpson was gratuitous. And that gratuitous act leads to another gratuitous act. And now apply exactly that and it's a knife attack, where Ron Goldman is not an intended victim. He didn't, the killer had no idea Ron Goldman was going to be there. He had no idea that, that this person that he ultimately killed was Ron Goldman. I doubt whether they'd ever met, right? So one gratuitous act leads to another. So tragic as this sounds, probably Ethan, you can see his face right next to mine, probably wasn't an intended victim. He was part of one gratuitous act leads to another, and the same with Xana. Possibly the same with either Maddie or Kaylee. I've got to say I'm caught in between. I first thought the primary victim was Maddie. That was my first thought. Then I thought it was Kaylee. Then I thought it was Maddie. And now it's very hard to say. To me, they are neck and neck. They're very, very close. I think I'm leaning a bit towards Maddie based on certain things. But it's very hard to say. There are definitely arguments for both victims. Even if the converse is true, that the killer did mean to kill all four, even if you say, okay, so that's actually what happened. So let's say law enforcement say, dude, we can actually prove that's nonsense. Even that's not as unknowable in terms of why as you may imagine. Elliot Rogers started his siege at Isla Vista by doing exactly the same thing, knifing to death each of his roommates, each in turn. Like Jodi Arias, he also used other weapons as well. He went from knife to firearm and his vehicle. And that is what makes this case potentially very dangerous, because our killer is still on the loose. Our killer may do an Elliot Rodger, if he's an Elliot Rodger type. If there was no targeting of the girls upstairs, and if it wasn't one of the girls, but even both of the girls, then that whole thing of gratuitousness could continue. 4 murders leads to XYZ. Hence this. People need to be aware that the killer is still out there, and the killer may be aware the students are graduating, and some of them I may not see ever again, and I'm going to lose my chance to get payback that I still feel like I need to get. Right? So even if you say it wasn't a targeted attack, the killer meant to kill 4 people in the house, then you're dealing with an Elliot Rodgers scenario, which means it's extremely gratuitous. In fact, the killer's not done yet, and he may graduate from knife to gun to car like Elliot Rodger did. Those are the sort of 2 poles between which we've got to figure out the criminal psychology. Elliot Rodger, so earlier I said, if you really want to drill down into this case, Jodi Arias isn't the best example. Rather use someone who was a student. Well, there's Amanda Knox and Meredith Kircher and Rafaela Celeste. They were all students. They were living in a student house. There was also a knife attack. But then there's also Elliot Rodger. He was a student. What was he so upset about? We know. I've written a book about him called Incel, right? We know what he was upset about because he wrote a manifesto. His crime was extremely gratuitous. Why was he so upset? Because he wasn't able to have his gratuitous fun. Everyone was having gratuitous fun. He wasn't. So he exacted gratuitous violence on his victims. That was his way of getting back at them. So I think Elliot Rodgers' crime is one of the most gratuitous you'll come across. What was gratuitously going on in the background to his life? Okay, I'm going to just close my window here. I'll just give me a second. Henry Nelson also says, what is gratuitous? There it is. Unjustified, unwarranted, unprovoked, gratuitous violence, unnecessary. Okay. Mickey O'Shea says he was radicalized online. I think that's kind of true of everyone today. We are if you don't use the word radicalized, you can say triggered. We look at social media. There's a documentary that's just come out on the royals, and they were also, I think, Meghan found out about who Harry was by looking at his Instagram. All of us are radicalized or activated online to a large extent because online has taken up so much of our lives now. And so you also want to look at what was going on online on the victim's social media, what is on Kaylee's Instagram on the last day. Well, who's part of this happy family and who isn't? What was part of Madison's social media that could have made someone else feel a bit upset? Okay, let's continue. Can I take away gratuitous? If someone else asks what is gratuitous, can you guys answer them? I mean, you guys should know by now, but otherwise I'll I'll come back to it. Okay, let me continue. So the same true crime intertextuality can be applied to triple axe murderer Henry von Breda, and I think I wrote 5 books about him. Indefensible is the first one, and then Diablo 1, 2, 3, 4. Think about axe murders. Axe murders are even more gratuitous than a knife, even a Rambo knife. Do you agree when I say that? Let me ask you guys, do you think a knife murder, do you think an axe murder is more or less gratuitous than a knife murder? What does Susan say? Amy says, where can I purchase the Amanda Knox books by Nick? Well, if you go onto my authors page, just scroll around and you'll find them there. Shall I put a link to some of them? Let's see if I can just quickly find the series. The Legal Files are a really good series, and then there's Deceit, Dark Matter, etc. So let me just quickly put a link to that in chat. That's one trilogy on Amanda Knox, and then there's another trilogy. I'll just quickly find it for you. It's called The Legal Files. That's this trilogy. I actually meant to write 5 books in the series. I just never quite got to that. It's actually the case in so many cases. I just I didn't have enough time to finish one series when another crime took place. Okay, so I was saying the axe murders, what's more gratuitous, an axe murder, killing with an axe, or killing with a Rambo knife? Which one would you say? Bria, you are very late, but there's still quite a long way to go. Shadow says a weapon is a weapon regardless of what it is in the hands of a person with intent. Not in terms of this gratuitous question. So you could shoot someone quickly, one shot, and it's, let's call it a neat, clean kill. Or you could physically beat someone with a sharp object, or like an axe or whatever, and it would take a lot longer, and there would be the issue of taking sadistic pleasure in that process, wanting it to be a drawn out process. And do you guys remember where the Joker says to a cop in The Dark Knight why he enjoys using a knife? Because he wants to enjoy the process of killing someone. That's because he's such a sadistic person, because he's such a sick person, because he wants to take gratuitous pleasure in that. Does that make sense? Yeah, so anyway, I don't think, to me, I think it's quite obvious. Using an axe is far, in a way, it's a far worse weapon than a knife, because it can be intercepted. The injuries can take longer to inflict, but can be significant. I just think someone is taking far more gratuitous pleasure. If you offer someone, do you want to use this knife or this axe? I think the axe speaks to gratuitous violence far more than a knife. And of course, it was his own family members. The victims here weren't related, and this person wasn't living with them, so that makes it even worse. So what is the gratuitous backstory in Henry's life? Does anyone know? Just because you don't know or can't see it doesn't mean there isn't a why. So if you can't figure out why, it doesn't mean there is no why. It means you can't figure it out. It also doesn't mean you say words like psychopath or misogyny. So that's just too easy, and that's cheating the process, cheating the work, cheating the effort, cheating the degree of difficulty. It's a criminal, not that it is a crime, but it's kind of like cheating in true crime to do that. Okay. So what do you think was the gratuitous backstory in Henry's life? That's a really important question to ask, because it's in a way an analogy to what the question is we need to ask here. What was the gratuitous backstory to the unknown killer in this story, in the Idaho student murders? By the way, I don't like referring to it, and I won't refer to it as Idaho 4. It's like West Memphis 3. When I think of West Memphis 3, I don't think of the victims. I think of the accused perpetrators. When you think of gangs and so on, you think of those words. You don't think of, by saying the Idaho 4, I just think it's a tasteless, horrible way of referring to 4 beautiful people in order to have a hashtag or something. I noticed Law and Crime also referred to it the way I have been, which is Idaho student murders. That's, to me, the right way to deal with it. I just don't like the reducing them to a number, the Idaho 4. I just don't like that at all. Susan says reaction to rejection. Henry was not very old. Yes, Henry was a student as well. So you have exactly with this potential killer, you've got to look at someone who was a student. His brother was a student, and he was pissed off at his family enough to kill them with an axe. What was he pissed off about? And then you can ask some of the same questions. Was someone about to go on a trip somewhere? Was something about to end or something about to begin? Right? And the answer is yes. And so how do you apply that to this story? Well, the answer is you can apply it. Something was about to end and something was about to begin. Someone didn't want that to end or begin without them in it. If it's not going to happen for me, it's not going to happen for you. If you're going to have all this gratuitous fun and I'm not, well, then I'm going to be gratuitously violent. That's not me speaking, that's me providing the criminal psychology, right? So just because you don't know, can't see it, doesn't mean there isn't a why. It means you need to think about it and figure it out. I wrote a bunch of books on Henry, and I don't know, for me, it's patently obvious why he committed the crime. But even the judge at the end of the case said, you know what, I'm sentencing you to life, but we still don't know why you did this. After the media had been covering it exhaustively, they said the same thing. There was another journalist that I sat next to that wrote a book about it. He had a big article in a double-page spread in the newspaper where he said, yeah, we still don't know why. And yet all my books were about that. And I feel like I found out why. I mean, I can tell you, looking at Henry's brother's Facebook, I felt jealous. His brother was at university in Melbourne and he was living this incredible life. Absolutely beautiful woman at his arm, beautiful girlfriends. But just the color of it all, you know, he was part of a rugby team and he was part of a rowing team, almost like in Oxford or Cambridge, but this time in Australia. And all of it looked like this absolute fairy tale. And I didn't know Rudy from a bar of soap. And I was looking at his social media, at his Facebook, and I was jealous. I was like, jeepers, dude, you are one lucky son of a gun. And if I was feeling that, can you imagine how his brother was feeling sitting at home, his younger brother, sitting at home, having been, well, not in Australia anymore. The killer not killed the dog, emotionally attached. Possibly. Also, you can ask the question, was the killer a dog lover? Does the killer himself have a dog? But thanks a lot for that, Natty B. Natty B, do you know the case in New Zealand, David Bain? I don't know if you've heard of that, but that's also a case that's quite intertextual to this case in New Zealand. Daniel says, let's just put that up. Thanks a lot, Daniel. Daniel says, perhaps the girls upstairs were the targets, but the killer knew Ethan was there and he felt he needed to kill him first, as he was the biggest threat. I think if you consider that the time that he went there, which is the time almost everyone was asleep, even this one witness, even the witness that thought he heard a scream, he was about to bed down for the night. So it was the time where most people you would expect to be asleep, including Ethan. I think he went there with the expectation that everyone would be asleep. And I also think he thought that he could get in and out. I'm not saying wisely or intelligently or thinking about the consequences. If anything, this person wasn't thinking about the consequences enough. Anytime someone commits murder, they're not thinking about the consequences enough or in enough detail or for a long enough time. And that's besides other things you need to think about. So I actually, I don't think that was his approach, but it certainly makes practical sense. But if your intended target is Kaylee, for example, I suppose you could make the argument, isn't it better to kill her before she even gets home, or when she's walking by herself, or something like that? Why was there this sudden urgency that night then to commit the crime? Why couldn't he have waited to get the target alone? And I think part of that is the student psychology of knowing, well, if someone is really, really drunk, they would be hard to, they wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight, right? The other thing I think to consider is, wouldn't another student know that? Another thing to consider is, wasn't the killer stone cold sober when he committed the crime? So I think one thing law enforcement could say is they could say, we are looking for someone who was sober that night. Wouldn't that be fairly easy to do? To have, theoretically, have college students rat on their fellow students who wasn't partying that night, who was sober, or who was partying but was sober. And of course, that brings us to another aspect, which was the person too sober, or were they actually under the influence of something? Was the crime committed because someone was too sober, or because they were not sober? Okay. In the Henry van Breda case, he was a student. The murder of Meredith Kircher, also a student, also knives, also lots of blood, also staging, moving bodies, and some housework on the way out. What is the basic psychology of something that's gratuitous, such as eating or having sex with someone, or violence? Let me say that again. What is the basic psychology of something that's gratuitous? Eating, having sex with someone, or violence? Well, here's the answer. One thing leads to another. And I've said this already. It looks like here one victim led to another. Faticus, thanks so much. Appreciate that. Thanks. One thing leads to another. That's also how addiction happens. When you fall in love with someone, one thing leads to another. When you fall out of love, one thing can lead to another as well. One leads to more. And what is the reverse of that? What's the opposite of gratuitous? Well, words like essential, fair, proper, indispensable, justifiable, necessary. So the person we are looking for, I think, felt disposable, felt inessential or insignificant. He felt the world was unfair. In a word, he felt invalidated. So if you're saying, what is the motive here? What is going on in this person's thought process? Well, in a fairly broad way, the answer, I think, is quite clear. In the same way that these victims were disposed of in a gratuitous way, one by one, I think he felt disposable. He felt left behind. Someone else is going on with their life. I'm leaving you behind. Not essential, not mentioned in their social media. You are going off on your big adventure, but you didn't even mention me in your going away letter, in your going away message. Couldn't someone have felt that in terms of Kaylee's last Instagram? The last Instagram saying, this is the end of an era at college. We had a wonderful time, and these were the people that were part of that wonderful time, and we're going to go on and live happily ever after. Thanks for all the memories. Well, isn't someone looking at that thinking, I wasn't part of that. I was never part of that. I wanted to be part of that. I'm never going to be part of that. I didn't have my fairy tale. And so they feel the world's unfair, and they feel that person that could have made them feel like $1 million, if they'd been part of that Instagram, they may have felt, wow, It actually was quite a great adventure, wasn't it? But because they're not, they feel invalidated, and not only that, a lot of other cards come crashing down. But I thought we were friends. I thought I meant something to you. I thought I was special. Okay. And isn't that the same thing Jodi Arias felt? Is it the same thing? It's a question. Is it the same thing OJ felt? Is it the same thing Amanda Knox felt? It's again a question. If they felt, meaning Jodi Arias and say Henry, that their victim made them feel irrelevant or insignificant, if Henry van Breda's brother made him feel irrelevant, you love my brother, you don't love me, to his parents. You give my brother all of this special treatment, but not me. I'm insignificant. I'm not essential. I'm disposable. I'm irrelevant. What's one way to come back from that? What's one way, if you've decided you are making me feel irrelevant and insignificant? What's one way to come back from that? How can you achieve that significance that you want instantly, immediately? How can you get that back immediately as a young man, as a student? I mean, you can't like go out and get a job and prove yourself and instantly get that significance. You can't go to a bar and sort of land a supermodel and like instantly get that status you want. So how can you cheat that process? What was a way to come back from that social death and achieve significance gratuitously? Well, the answer is simple: violence through force. You see it in the movies all the time. The guy who kills the most and kills the most effectively and efficiently, you respect him. Like the Terminator, like John Wick, like the Equalizer. It's gratuitous, but it's how the central character reclaims his place on the rung of society's ladder, often after losing it. With John Wick, someone kills his dog, and then he finds a way of coming back from that. In movie land and Gamerville, it's all totally justified. Think about the idea that gratuitous violence is gratuitous, while in certain places it's not. In the movies, it's warranted and it's because someone was provoked and it's justified. In computer games, it's not gratuitous, it's warranted, it's you provoked me, it's justified. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, this little girl dies and someone writes a gratuitous ransom note justifying that there was a reason why she was abducted and everything else, and why she could be killed, justifying that. And interestingly, a lot of that ransom note felt like it was based on someone who watched a lot of movies. So aren't we dealing with the same thing here? Someone who is quite young, who reads a lot or watches a lot of movies, more than average. So a lot of people do watch a lot of movies, but this person does so more than average. That's quite a hard profile when you're dealing with students, because what you say is average. Okay. In a very simple way, doing things gratuitously not only feels justified, it feels good. That is the tar road psychology, where you can see how you feel about things can sometimes apply to criminal psychology. So haven't you ever exercised or suffered and you took gratuitous pleasure out of that? I'm talking about your own pain. So maybe you lost weight, or you exercised, or you ran marathons, but you suffered in some way, but you actually took pleasure in that. it was an excessive thing, but you actually enjoyed it. I think a lot of us take pleasure in drinking a lot. You drink gratuitously, you drink excessively, you drink far more than you should, you drink too much, and you enjoy it, and it feels good. And in a certain context, that's fine. But it can get out of hand if you keep doing things gratuitously, excessively. So it could also be someone who does excessive things in many areas, not just one area. It could be a gratuitous person. And so why does it feel good to be gratuitous? Because life's unfair. Because we feel like we're deprived, we feel like we need to make up for it by doing certain things without good reason. The good reason is because life's unfair. It's a good reason for us, but it's not really a good reason. Why did this person commit this crime? Because he felt his life, his circumstances, how he was being treated was unfair. Maybe in the scheme of his life it was unfair, but many people would say, yeah, well, life sucks. All of us deal with things that aren't fair. Well, he was struggling to deal with that. What was Elliot Rodgers' quote? Life's unfair. Why do you do things gratuitously? Because you don't always get what you want, and sometimes that's too much to bear. One person, when they don't get what they want, cries. Another one lashes out. One person, when they don't get what they want, drinks. Another one lashes out. Another one drinks and lashes out. Okay. So much for the rational argument. So there's also an irrational argument for gratuitous violence. And guess where we find the meat and potatoes for all things irrational? Well, the number 3 clue that we all missed. Now, I do want to bring up this point that was brought up by someone on my Patreon. I'm not giving their name because they might not like to be identified, but who knows? So can you guys read that? So it reads, I get the message that a killer is determined to steamroll through a crime, and maybe the quicker the better. However, OJ had years of pent-up hate for Nicole. While it doesn't make a lot of sense to kill 4 people on a off-the-cuff comment of doesn't look like they are into you unless there's a ton of something at stake. So what that person's basically saying is, shouldn't we be dealing with years of pent-up hate or years of even love in this case? Are we dealing with a fairly random person, or are we dealing with someone who's had a relationship for a long time? And my response to the whole OJ thing was, yeah, but OJ, my response to that question was, someone also killed Ron Goldman, and I don't think they had a long relationship with him. So some of it you could explain through one thing leads to another. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's got to be a big backstory around it. But I think probably there is a backstory. The question is it years long, a year long, months long, weeks long, a few nights long? That's the question. The question is, how long is this backstory? The gratuitous nature of this suggests that it is not yesterday or the day before, but it's possible. I do think it is something that built up over a period of at least a couple of weeks, but that's kind of anybody's guess. But then you've got to deal with the irrational aspect. What do you think is the irrational aspect of this crime? So someone is saying, I think the killer started with Ethan, ... That's a rational approach. That's how, in your assessment of true crime, your assessment of criminal psychology, how the criminal would think. But is that how the criminal thought? Was it rational? Was it entirely rational? So if you take Henry van Breda, was that crime entirely rational? If you take the murder of Meredith Kercher and the fabric of things around that case, substances and so on, was that entirely rational? If you take even the O.J. Simpson case, was that an entirely rational case? Were there any substances going on? Were there any other aspects that one can talk about? And I don't like going too far in the irrational thing, because then you say, because of this disorder or because of these drugs, someone committed a crime. No, the drugs didn't commit the crime. No, the alcohol didn't take that person's life. The person who drank the alcohol did. So now we're going to deal with the number 3 clue we all missed. Anyone know what that is? Anyone know what the number 3 clue is that we all missed? I don't think that's the case. I think the person came there with the intent to kill at least one person. I don't think they went there expecting something else. But I suppose you could theorize that perhaps the killer in his own daydream thought that something might happen with one of the girls, only to find one of the girls in bed with one of the girls, and who knows. I see that as a very, very, very slight possibility, but possible. When we think of gratuitous behavior, we tend to lump them into a classical cliched trifecta: sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Let me say that again. When we think of gratuitous behavior, excessive behavior, how do we tend to think of it? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. People at rock concerts, which are often students, right? Lovely Sphinx says, "You're incredible. Please give me a list of all your books." Thanks a lot for that compliment. I can give you my author page, and I think that's probably the best place to start. This is my author page, and yeah, there are dozens of books at this link. So, Lovely Sphinx, just check out that link, okay? Hang on, I think I gave you the wrong link there. Let me try and get it right. It's that link, I think. Will that fit? There you go. That should work. Okay, Chelsea Taylor, new member. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you, Chelsea. Nice name. Okay, so sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? That is, let me just post that again. That's kind of the classical trifecta for excess. I mean, when we think of celebrities that are sort of going off the deep end, we tend to think of kind of rock musicians, but that tends to be the classical trifecta, that when you're living gratuitously, well, there's a lot of sex, there's a lot of drugs, and so on. And I don't think it's an insult to say, I think it's fair to say, at a certain point, Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, their lives were about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Wouldn't you say that's fair? That they were living quite a gratuitous life, quite an excessive life. Both of them. It involved a lot of sex. It involved a lot of those other things as well, right? Do you agree with that? So when you have that situation, sex, drugs, and rock and roll isn't necessarily music. It is something else. It could be music. It could be something that you're very focused on, your hobby, your passion, whether it's camping or concerts, whether it's climbing Mount Everest or going to desert, what's that festival in the desert? Burning Man, right? Whatever it is, but it's sex, drugs, and then this adventure that you're on, whether it's work or whatever it is. And so the question is, how do these three aspects play into one another? Now think about sex, drugs, and rock and roll at university, right? The rock and roll is whatever you're doing. Maybe you go to maybe the rock and roll is parties. Maybe the rock and roll is going skiing on the local lake. Maybe it is, I don't know, going hunting with your pals. But it's this combination of sex, drugs, and the thing that I like doing with my pals, right? It's that lifestyle. And then the question is, how do these three different things combine with one another to create something that's gratuitous? And you could say, well, does something fall out of that equation at a certain point? Does it eventually become just drugs and rock and roll? Does it become drugs and sex, or does it become sex and rock and roll? How do these three things interplay with one another? You could even say the rock and roll is just the student life, the going to class, going to a party, right? How does sex affect studies? How do drugs affect studies? How do the drugs affect the sex? How does sex affect the drugs? How do sex and drugs affect the studies? How do the studies affect sex and drugs, kind of thing, right? And it's kind of a question all of us have got to ask and address at some point is, can you hold back the fun when you've got work to do? Can you impose self-discipline on yourself? Can you stop being gratuitous and get back to what you need to get back to? And the answer sometimes is no. No, I can't stop. No, I don't want to stop. And sometimes the answer is yes. Yes, I can stop, and yes, I'm going to stop. Now, what happens if you want to stop and can stop, but the person next to you can't and doesn't want to? What if you're in a relationship with someone who is doing things gratuitously with you, but decides, I need to grow up now and stop doing those things, but the other person either can't grow up or can't stop or doesn't want to stop? Can you see how that can create a scenario where there's something gratuitous going on that suddenly comes to an end, and that wasn't my choice? I didn't want things to end, you did, right? So someone says here, kicked out of a fraternity, that's one way for it to come to an unpleasant end. I want to have gratuitous fun, but I can't. Why can't I? Well, it's all your fault. Why is it all your fault? Well, I don't know what the answer specifically is, but there certainly is an answer to that. And we've already heard rumors about that, and that's I think part of the fabric that is going to come to light over time. So let me go through that again. Does sex have an impact on rock and roll? How about drugs on rock and roll? Does sex have an impact on drugs? How about drugs on sex? Does rock and roll lead to more sex or more drugs? In other words, does being in a student situation lead to more sex? Does being in a student situation lead to more drugs? And again, it comes back to this thing I've been saying. One thing leads to another, and all of it is gratuitous. That's the moral of the story, or maybe the immoral of the story, when you're at college. One thing leads to another, and it becomes more and more gratuitous. One of the symptoms of being a student is expressing yourself gratuitously. Would you agree with that? like, it's almost like a rite of passage. You expect to go to college and you expect to get drunk more than normal. You expect to have sex more than usual. I wouldn't say it's more than normal because it probably is normal. You expect to enjoy your freedom and be gratuitous, have fun, have a lifestyle that is fun based, and it's not warranted, the amount of fun you're having. It's not justified. That's the point, is that it is something that you do because it's not supposed to be right, or there's a reason for it. There isn't. The reason for it is I'm alive. The reason for it is that's how I get meaning out of my life. I'm young and I want to have fun. There is no serious story around it, right? But living gratuitously like that can be so enjoyable, so compelling, that to lose it can be devastating. It can feel like you are having the time of your life, the happiest time of your entire life. Of course, it's kind of an illusion, because you've got to go back to the real world where there aren't fraternities, and you've got to go back to the real world where you work 9 to 5 and you've got to pay bills and so on. You've got to go back to the real world where you don't have parties and you can't get drunk, and you've at some point got to settle with a partner. But there's a point where all of it feels awesome. I'm having so much fun. I'm so happy. And so to lose that can feel like the end of the world. Wait, what says, this is making me nervous. My daughter starts college in the fall. Well, this crime should make you really nervous. Hopefully not too nervous. So I think by having this conversation, a lot of you guys are starting to remember college in a way that maybe you haven't let yourselves remember till now. There is ecstasy involved. I mean, ecstasy in the sense of exquisite pleasure and beauty and joy and fun, right? Just that whole freewheeling thing, which is associated with being young and being beautiful, and the most beautiful you will ever be. The most bright-eyed and bushy-tailed you'll ever be. And so when you miss out within that context of the sparkling possibilities of being alive with other beautiful people, that can feel terrible. Terry says, would a gratuitous killer still feel validated? It's hard to say. I would imagine that sense of invalidation is very, very deep. There may be a little bit of validation where I got away with this, I've outsmarted everyone, right? So if you think about, for example, the Delphi killer, that sense of, I committed this crime because I'm a small guy, but I actually outsmarted everyone and I'm living in plain sight. He would probably get quite an ego kick out of that. But that's him. A young person whose life is a lot more unstable and their moods could be shifting. And also the drug aspect could turn things around just like that. They could, to try and escape the humdrum of trying to get away with murder, they may take refuge in substances, which then activates some of these feelings all over again. And I think the other question you've got to ask is, are you off, if you're the killer, after committing this crime, are you less lonely or more lonely? Is your life better or worse? And it's hard for me to imagine it would be better, and it's hard to be imagine that this person is less lonely. In other words, so if the situation has worsened, then isn't the likelihood that the crime is going to repeat better? ask yourself these questions. If this person has gone from being already lonely and rejected to now is even lonelier, these people that he hated are now dead. Maybe they could have patched things up and whatever. The whole student thing has fallen to pieces. So where's this person sitting now at home compared to where he was at university? So is this person lonelier than he was? I would find that easy to imagine. Is this person feeling less validated? I would find that also quite easy to imagine, especially if, yeah, I don't want to go into social media, but yeah. Okay. So, as I say, one of the symptoms of being a student is expressing yourself gratuitously. Is it done through sex? Check. Drugs? Check. Rock and roll, which could be music or any other activity one is preoccupied with, your studies, student life, the whole fun adventure thing? Check. If there are more than if there's more than one thing in a gratuitous scenario, can that lead to less of another thing? So if there's more of one thing, such as more drugs, can you have less sex? Or if you have more sex, less drugs? Now think about that dynamic in terms of a partying situation. Somebody who comes to a party and they take drugs excessively, they act so crazy, and at the next party it's worse, the next party it's worse. They break things, they set things on fire, they are abusive, they do dangerous things or whatever it is. I think we all know about this. Someone comes along who just can't handle the alcohol, and it gets worse and worse. They can't handle the drugs and gets worse and worse. And eventually, because they can't stop themselves, they've got to be kind of kicked out of the whole thing, right? That's the drug situation. You can also have a sex situation where someone sleeps with someone and then they cheat on that person with someone else, and it goes from being fun and silly and who's the man to something that's not so pleasant anymore. Maybe that person picks up a STD, or maybe that the person starts wanting a certain level of sexual activity that someone else is uncomfortable with, or they become more and more pushy or more and more demanding, or they start hitting on people constantly. And then that person becomes a problem. And maybe it's a combination of the sex and drugs, but that person becomes persona non grata. And that person is so caught up with the gratuitous thing that they're almost blinded by it. It's like this hedonistic whirlwind. And then suddenly, well, you're not even allowed to come to this party. Well, what does that feel like? So suddenly you've gone from the life of the party and basically a party animal to, well, you're not even allowed to come to the parties now. What do you do with that? So that's the irrational aspect to this that could be part of it. In true crime cases that are intertextual to this one, many, if not most, many people don't understand or underestimate the role drugs play in turning someone into someone else. Which is why you can imagine if you committed a crime while on drugs or while coming off them, you might say, I'm not that person. So you could actually have this person who committed this crime, who killed the four students. He may rationalize to himself, that wasn't me. I did that while I was high, or I did that while I was paranoid, or I did that while on X, Y, or Z. That wasn't me. That may be how they rationalize it. except you were that person, except you are that person. It's just you on steroids. But drugs didn't commit any of these crimes. The gratuitous use and gratuitous psychology surrounding it did. So there is a kind of a short explanation. There's a very short explanation. The gratuitous psychology surrounding this house and these people is what committed this crime. The gratuitous psychology going into someone's life, mind, body, that is what drove this crime. So let me ask it a different way. If you took away the drugs in some of the true crime cases we know, do you think the cases would have happened? That's quite a difficult question to answer. So let me ask it in a different way, because it's kind of the same thing. If you took sex out of some of the cases that we know, high profile cases that we know, if you just took that element out of the case, do you still think it would have happened? Right? And a really good example of that is the Chris Watts case. So if you took just that element, if you took the sexual element completely out of the Chris Watts case, do you think that crime would have taken place? I think the answer is very, very obvious. No, it wouldn't have, because he was blinded by the affair he was having and the feelings he was having. So if you take that away, then you don't have the gratuitous thing at all. And so I think you can ask the same question here. Was this crime motivated by sex? Is it a gratuitous pursuit of sex? And so you can ask the question, if you took sex out of this picture, would the crime still have happened? Or you can ask, and you can ask, if you took drugs out of this picture, would the crime still have happened? That's a good point. So the Dharma case, you had quite a lot of, I mean, it was sex based on being drunk quite a lot of the time. So, yeah. When Chris Watts started to thrive and had an affair, he committed the unthinkable crime based on the easiest and simplest of temptations. I want more. You know, anyone who is drinking in that place where you're drinking and you're having fun, your basic psychology is like that of a imbecile. It's, I want more. I want to drink more and I want to have more fun. I want more. That's kind of the student psychology as well. More fun, right? Brittany says, where's your cute dog? I think he's lying on my bed. One thing leads to another, and if you allow that psychological horse to bolt, so if you allow that thing of, I want more to overtake you, I want more fun, I want more fun, I want more fun. If you allow that to overtake you, it's going to run all the way. It's going to crash through all the barriers and follow its path of least resistance back to wherever it most wants to go. And it's in this sense that you should be able to see yourself being capable of being the killer in this case, is just from that place of saying, I want more, and you not stopping yourself, and no one being able to stop you. And eventually you do get more, and you do drink more, and you do sleep around more, and you do fuck up your studies, and you do, you're like a bull in a china shop. But I want more, I want more. In a way, you've just become kind of an addict to hedonism. And then someone says, or for whatever reason, you are stopped from getting more. That sort of roller coaster ride stops, but you insist that it continues on. And isn't that where you turn to gratuitous violence to have your way? Drugs help enormously with that premise of getting you where you want to go. So why not in true crime? Linda says hedonists don't slaughter unless sociopathic. I think there's so many crimes committed by drug addicts, it's not funny. And they are hedonists by definition. I just want to feel good all the time. So I don't know if I would agree with that. Magical Mother says, do you think it's possible if the killer was drunk, he got in that state so he could commit the crime? My sense is that the crime was committed by someone who was sober, meaning not drunk. I don't think they were drinking, but I do think it's possible that they were on a drug or something. I don't think they were stumbling around and they were, in that sense. But I do think substances do play a role in this. Okay, so are drugs part of the story of this case? I must say, as I cover more and more high-profile true crime, it starts to be a case not of whether drugs or alcohol are part of the fabric. It's not a question of is it part of the fabric, but when are they not part of it? And it's simply because substances are so part of our culture these days. People are on some kind of substance anyway, whether it is antidepressants, whether it is, I don't know, vitamins or whatever. We're like a chemical generation. It's just so normal. And it does have an impact on our minds and our motives and our psychology. Using chemicals as a crutch or as a cradle or as a way of not dealing with life. And so you may not be used to dealing with life because of these substances. And so when you're faced with a thing that is particularly hard to deal with, what do you do? Liesel says, Nick, do we know if someone was kicked out of a corner bar? I don't know about that. It would be a shortcut, but all too easy for law enforcement to put up wanted posters for bottles of beer. If you could say someone who was drunk committed this crime, well, then what should they do? Put up wanted posters for beer bottles. Beer didn't commit the crime. Someone who drank beer did. And so the real why is he drinking, right? The real why is he drinking? And again, if you say it's so hard, I'll never be able to understand why these crimes happen. Why do you sometimes drink? Why do I sometimes drink? I sometimes drink when I can't sleep. I sometimes drink when I'm stressed. What's this person's reason for drinking or doing whatever he's doing? Well, students have, as much as it's gratuitous and it's fun, they can have a lot more stress than we do. They've got exams to write and their futures depend on them passing them or not. They can be attracted to a person who could theoretically be a life partner, theoretically become a permanent partner, a wife, a husband, a permanent marriage partner. Or if it doesn't work out, you come out of college not in that situation. A Voice for Hope says, I think it was someone who was celibate. Does feel like that, doesn't it? Bria, that is also very true. Lots of people drink when they're happy. Sorry, I forgot about that aspect. But certainly in terms of dysfunctional drinking, you may drink because you're unhappy, or you may drink to get happy if you're unhappy, whatever it is. But that's a good point. Thanks. That actually made me smile. Okay. Just wondering whether, like, I've already been talking 2 hours 40 minutes. Do you guys want me to continue? So what is the real why is drinking or taking whatever? What is gnawing at the belly of the beast? Well, we already know the broad answer to this: social death and the nicks and stabs of unrequited love that's part of social death. But since the finer details of who remains unknown, not unknowable, just temporarily out of reach, the finer details of why also remain just temporarily out of reach. But do you see the basic why? It wasn't such a long walk in the park now, was it? Okay. I don't know if I want to deal with the number 3 clue we all missed, like in more detail. I just feel too tired to do it. I think I'm going to instead talk a little bit about social media. Have you guys seen this? Let me bring it up. Have you guys seen that? Leanne says, I believe it's somebody feeling invalidated, whether that be from one of the girls or society. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good assessment. But we want to know specifically, what does that mean? Invalidated how, by who, when, what, why, right? Songbird says, do you have a suspect? There are a couple of people that make sense to me, but yeah, not take it too much further than that. So can you see on this press release that came out very recently? Let me read it here. Investigators have been monitoring online activity. They're aware of a large amount of rumors and misinformation. And then also that people have been, I guess, contacting potentially involved parties, whatever that means, and threatening them, right? Anyone engaging in threats could be subjecting themselves to criminal charges. Moscow PD cautions the public not to rely on rumors and remains committed to keeping the public informed. We urge reliance on official channels for accurate information. Is there anyone here who watched a channel that claimed they could see blood coming down the walls? Is there anyone here who watched the channel? And please don't mention the name of the channel here. The idea is not to do that. The idea is just to address this idea of misinformation. That same channel seemed to be claiming that they had the audio of the scream on the night of the murders. So you've got a channel saying, we've got exclusive footage of blood coming down the inside of the walls of the house, as well as the screams of the victims. So if that's true, why is nobody else talking about it? Not the mainstream media, not even the police, right? Someone says it looks like blood. Did you think so? It looked like cracks to me on a door. And there was no evidence tape around that. There was, I think, evidence tape somewhere else, but there's no evidence tape there. There was actually evidence tape around what looked like a handprint on a window. And then are you telling me where there's actual blood, there's no evidence tape? Also, if you're going to deal with the screams, the recording, if you want to call it that, of the screams is like just that, and then the whole show ends. It's like a few seconds and then the show ends. If your life was in, just ask yourself this question. If your life was in danger, you're about to die, and you're actually being stabbed, do you think you would sound like that? Would you be sort of in the middle of an argument, like where you would say whatever was said? Bear in mind, you're about to die and you're experiencing excruciating pain. Now, besides all that, you heard Ashley Banfield saying that the neighbor said he was dozing off when all of this happened, and he didn't think to report it. But then he did think to record it, and he didn't give that recording to the police. He was dozing off when he heard it, and he didn't think it was really that important, but then he did get up to record it. But then he didn't give that to the police or the media. He gave it to a social media channel. And that social media channel didn't start off their episode with that, which you'd think they would, if it's such big evidence. You'd think you would open up your thing with this big reveal of this thing that is incredible. Right? Yeah, someone says, how can you record an unexpected, not there yet, how can you record an unexpected scream when your phone is already on? So I just want to talk about this very briefly, because I think it's quite important. Do you guys think it's important? So basically, this is just about the Idaho police are warning of criminal charges, basically for witch hunting web sleuths, something I've been speaking about in cases before this one. So have any of you guys seen the movie Ace Ventura, Pet Detective? Because that's kind of the spirit that I want to touch on here. Any of you guys seen that? So listen to the following.
May I tell you what I think happened?
So that's basically the bottom line of what true crime is all about. May I tell you what I think happened? This live stream was about, may I tell you why I think what happened, right? And some people are better at that than others. The other side to that is Ace Ventura then goes through his spiel, and the detective responds after he's told his story.
Well, that's a very entertaining story, but unfortunately, real detectives have to worry about that little thing called evidence.
Okay, did you hear that? In true crime, online detectives, let's face it, don't often feel bound by facts or evidence. Their forte is opinion on what can't or hasn't been proven, speculation on what's not known, just what they believe. If many are hit and miss, some like Ace Ventura do sometimes get it right, but in some there are better folks in true crime than others. Some are better than others, some are worse than others. But there's something for everyone in true crime. If you hate Amber Heard, do you hate Amber Heard? Well, there's a channel you can go to for that, where everyone is, where everything, all the content is dedicated to precisely that, hating Amber Heard. Every single video, even now, even a few hours ago, yesterday, the day before, it's all for that market. I hate Amber Heard. please say things about Amber Heard that are nasty. Wow, I'm enjoying this. I'm taking gratuitous pleasure out of hating Amber Heard until the end of time, I guess. Now, in this case, for which social media is still trying to find the right hashtag, as I say, I don't like the Idaho 4. I just don't like it. Some channels will openly name, accuse, and pursue their suspects and are doing that, while others try to toe the line and follow law enforcement's lead. And that's what this channel tries to do. It tries to follow law enforcement's lead while taking things a little further than law enforcement are prepared to admit. We have the perfect formula here for true crime to do what it does best, or is at worst, which is in the absence of certainty in an urgent and horrific case, well, voila, true crime can wave its magic wand and turn innocent people into suspects. Need answers? Can't get them from the authorities? Trust social media to tell you what you want to hear. And I mean, what's wrong with speculation? Well, the following, and this comes from the media. Online speculation about possible persons of interest has led to the intimidation of unnamed parties. And interestingly, it says here, who may or may not be associated with the case. Let me put this up. It's quite interesting that in their own assessment from the police, they say intimidation of parties who may or may not be associated with the case. Interesting. Not to put too fine a point on it, but do you see there's an admission there from Ali in may or may not be, that certain unnamed parties, besides those that may not be associated with the case, may be associated with the case. The trouble with exploring these issues in public and in public debates is that it's difficult to do so without it becoming a witch hunt. These are, after all, real people, and if your speculation is rational and reasonable but wrong, the damage your ultimately fictional assessment leaves behind is real. You make up a rational argument about something, it ends up being fiction because it's not right, it's not accurate, but it sounds right, it sounds rational. And then that fictional argument, something that's not true, has real consequences, and sometimes permanent consequences. You guys remember in the Amanda Knox case, Amanda speculated that her boss was involved. Well, he ended up not only losing and shutting down his business a few months later, he had to leave the country entirely. His entire life changed for the worse for him and his family. And that was based on speculation. That's from this article, if you guys are interested. So they go on to say, anyone engaging in threats or harassment, whether in person, online, or otherwise, needs to understand that they could be subjecting themselves to criminal charges. It's taken less than 4 weeks, but here we are. Law enforcement have finally said it, and I predict we're going to start to see this in every high-profile case coming forward. We're going to start to see law enforcement saying, social media, in high-profile cases, social media, slow down, stop taking gratuitous interest in this case, stop making gratuitous, I mean, if you want to talk about gratuitous, social media is definitely a good example. There's a lot of excess things going on in social media, speculation being one of them. So I do think in true crime, we're going to see this become standard, where law enforcement are going to say, almost right in the beginning, you need to be respectful online because there could be criminal charges if you are not. According to Fox News, the following individuals are not fair game, and by their own admission, not in the crosshairs of law enforcement. The 2 surviving roommates, then they say a male in the grub truck surveillance video, They don't say student. They don't say much more than that, just that he's male. Interestingly, Fox News say several men appear in that video, which seems to be a bit of a pushback against that statement, or a bit of a criticism against the vagueness of that statement. Then it refers to a private party driver who drove Gonsalves and Mogan home hours before their slayings. The male Kaylee and Madison called numerous times during the early morning hours of November 13th. And then the sixth person named on the lease, they're saying those people have been cleared. Now, there's an interesting mirror here where law enforcement have to tell the media not to target, while nevertheless refraining from naming them themselves, because this could lead to more targeting. It's almost a case that by saying, don't pay attention to these people, you create a lightning rod for precisely that. It's interesting getting Fox News' assessment on who and what the true crime community is. What do they say about who we are, and other people in true crime? They say, quote, a robust community of true crime followers has been discussing the case, a robust community, broadly across social media in Facebook groups, subreddits, Discord servers, Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, and elsewhere. Let me ask you guys, is that from Paul Bird? Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks for that. Let me ask you guys, where are you on social media? Are you only on YouTube? Are you on YouTube and Facebook? Are you on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok? Are you on everywhere? Are you on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit? Where are you mostly? I'll just be interested to hear. Thanks a lot, Laurel. Yeah, I have been. Thanks. Bria says I'm on TCRS. Bria, it's, I think, time for us to go to bed quite soon, eh? It's almost 1 o'clock in the morning where we are. So some of you say YouTube all day. Some say YouTube and Twitter. Most of you seem to say YouTube, Facebook only. Okay. Thanks a lot, Barbara. KK Nichols says, all my true crime stuff on YouTube. Okay. So what is quite interesting is, looks like Fox News contacted Facebook administrators, because I think that was where things were getting out of hand. And then the following happened. They say some groups are moderated, some aren't, some permit speculation, others prefer confirmed details only. So where do you think this channel, where do you think True Crime Rocket Science falls in terms of that definition? I would say we prefer confirmed sources. We prefer paying attention to credible information on this channel. We clearly, clearly some people don't think about confirmed sources or provide confirmed sources. Some are less anchored in these sorts of details. But it does appear Fox News reached out to some figureheads in true crime to discuss this sort of this issue of reckless sleuthing. In theory, this is gold for these channels. So to be quoted in the media, my name is Bob and I'm on this Facebook group or whatever, that's gold for your channel to be mentioned in the mainstream media. It's a chance to gain attention. I mean, that tends to be what social media wants, is to have people's attention on another platform. Well, except this is about misbehavior online, and it could actually have legal consequences. And so, as you might expect, social media don't want to have that conversation. And within that context, they want to protect their privacy. Isn't that an ironic turn of events? When you're potentially under the cosh, when you're potentially suspected of wrongdoing, how does exposure feel then? How does someone paying attention to you feel then? Do you see how that plays in the sharp light of day? So coming back to Fox News, they say several administrators of groups of tens of thousands of members did not immediately respond to requests for comment. One who did politely declined to speak on the record. So I've got to say, I wasn't one of the administrators contacted. That word seems to suggest forums like Reddit or Facebook more than YouTube. You guys agree? But nevertheless, holding my own channel accountable, I am aware that just in the past day or so, we covered Hoodie Guy and Beard Guy, and previously we covered the person that Kaylee and Maddie contacted in the final hours, right? When I did that, I discovered that Beard Guy engaged with the media and deleted his engagement, but he nevertheless seemed to have gone through the meat grinder of true crime. I think there's some people that consider him a suspect. I don't. But that is the warning that I am starting to put out. If you put up your hand and you engage with social media and you identify yourself, prepared to be made into a suspect. I think some people are starting to suspect the neighbor slash chef who heard the scream. They're starting to say, well, I don't trust what he said, so isn't he a suspect? So I've got to say, when I read articles like this on Fox News about harmful online speculation, I do ask myself, am I part of the problem? Are we part of the problem? Is this conversation part of the problem? But I've been asking that question throughout the narrative arc of the Kylie Rodney case before this case, and even before that, during Gabby Petito. Do you remember when people believed Brian Laundrie was capable of another double homicide? There seems to be a tendency with the true crime community that you want to imagine that cases are worse than they are. To me, the test is, can you fathom reality? Can you tell what is really going on? And also, how good are you at doing that? How good are you at driving the dirt road that is criminal psychology? Are you patient enough? Do you have the right vehicle? Do you have the right are you driving this dirt road properly, which is the right speed, with the right amount of patience, with the right vehicle, or not? Because you see so many when you in South Africa and the surrounding countries, Namibia and the Wild Coast, there are a lot of dirt roads, and simply people become impatient, and then they crash. They go off the road. When I came out of the dirt road section, when I was driving, there was a courier type vehicle that had a flat front tire, simply because he had driven too fast to be able to avoid rocks in the road and sharp stones. And so because he couldn't fix that wheel, he just drove on the flat tire until the end of the dirt road. I don't know what he did to his rim. Yeah, I am in South Africa. Okay. So how does TCRS deal with certain evidence in a way that's not harmful and not unduly speculative? I mean, we speculate, but how is it not harmful? How can other channels cover true crime in a way that's helpful and ethical? Well, I think these are quite simple answers to that. How can you cover true crime in a helpful way rather than a harmful way, right? Well, how about this? Tell the truth. So I, for example, just went to check on someone on my channel said there's a recording of the scream. And then I went to check where that was found. And I ultimately found it, and I thought it was not credible. And then I looked elsewhere, and I saw claims that I thought were quite outrageous, similarly outrageous, like look at the blood coming down the walls. And I'm looking and I'm saying, well, I don't, where, you know, and this is someone that has made similar claims before as well. So tell the truth. And some channels just obviously do not tell the truth. To me, it's such an irony. We're in the business of true crime, and it is a business, but we are in this theater of true crime. It's called true crime. You're supposed to tell the truth. You're supposed to find the real story and find out what really happened, and you know, find justice ultimately by finding out what the truth is. And yet many of the purveyors of this are not very attached to telling the truth. They don't mind not telling the truth. They're not that fussed if something's not true. And thanks a lot, Laurel. Don't we need to care in true crime whether something's true or not? If something's not true, is it okay? No, it was fun speculation. Is fake crime okay? Is speculating on things that aren't true and getting people intimidated and into trouble and muddying and murking justice and the pursuit of justice, is that all okay? I don't think it is. I think it's a serious problem. It's not okay. So tell the truth, repeat information from credible sources. That in a way is your responsibility. So don't go and come onto my channel or go onto someone else's channel and repeat either outrageous or unsubstantiated or crazy claims just because you've heard them. Make sure that you believe them, number one, but also what is this person's track record in making these sort of statements? Is he a clickbaiter? Is he a shock artist? Or is he someone who's actually a little bit more boring, but at least he tells the truth and it's rational and it's real and it's taken some effort to get that information? Or does he just snap his fingers and he's got these huge breakthrough, sensational things, but then nobody else even condescends to talk about it because they just don't believe it's true? So this applies to true crime creators, and it applies to you guys. If you're going to repeat information, make sure it's from credible sources. That's also part of telling the truth. Tell the truth. When you're repeating something, make sure that it's true. And then finally, and this is probably the most important, protect the identities of people you're paying attention to. Protect the identities of people in your story. For example, in the Delphi case, maybe you should protect the identity of his daughter, right? Do you have to show her face? If you were his daughter, would you want your face shown, right? And I'm very aware of it on YouTube. People want to see fresh content. They want to see pictures. They want to see what they want to see. And you want to give your audience what they want, but not at the cost of someone's privacy or something like that. Okay. So how do you do that? How do you protect identities? Well, by either not explicitly naming them or not explicitly showing their faces and not explicitly trawling through their social media. I mean, if someone is like arrested, like Richard Allen, then I think you can go through their social media, by all means have at it. But going through his daughter's social media, I think is totally different. I think that's where you've got to be careful. And I see a lot of people commenting, even on my channel, using certain people's names where the authorities have said, the authorities are not naming certain of these people. So why are you? I'm not. So why are you? You just need to be careful doing that. Because if you say someone's name and you make a certain accusation unambiguously, you could actually be dragged into court. And if you can't prove your case, you could suffer the same fate Amber Heard did. You could be sued for defamation. What you can do is you can say something like hoodie guy. You don't have to say the person's name. You can say a person in that situation, and it looks like it could be this or it could be that. But if you're going to speculate in that area, speculate about what you can actually see there, not what you can't see. Speculate what is visible in what you can see, right? Why did he lift up his arm? Not something else. That's kind of acceptable speculation. It's not acceptable to just repeat things that you heard somewhere else. Okay. And it's difficult to not show faces, to actually try and not cover certain information when social media is becoming more and more integral to true crime investigations. It's actually difficult. How do you put something out on social media, your face, your thoughts, your interactions, and then expect it still to be private? But don't you? Don't you still expect a certain degree of privacy? So one reason I never wanted to make lives is I felt at a certain point, someone decides they don't like you. Then there's this whole archive where they can try and find, cherry pick moments where you are embittered or accusing or ugly, and then put that together in a hate reel. And now you've given them the gift to do that. That's one reason why I never really wanted to do lives. And yet, I think there is a certain expectation of privacy. I certainly have the right to my good name, so I can say certain things online and I can do certain things, but I have the right to be assumed to be innocent of certain slanderous things. I have that right, you have that right, everyone has that right. In a true crime case, that also applies. I think true crime believe that whatever is out there in social media is fair game. I'm talking especially about creators. They think that whatever is out there on social media is fair game. So a crime has been committed. Let's go through their social media and just mine it for whatever we can find. Actually, it's not fair game. Making any accusation without basis, using someone's name or face when it's a direct and unambiguous statement can be illegal and likely is defamatory. I mean, when last did someone accuse you of murder? And if someone did that online, would you do or say nothing? It's kind of more acceptable to say, to qualify what you're saying. You don't say things absolutely or unambiguously. You can say, I think it seems as if that is going on, and rather don't use the person's name. It looks like it could be that and that and that, and you don't need to use the person's name. That is okay, but still try and do it responsibly. Do it in that way, but it's still a reasonable statement to make. Does that make sense? And it's important to know this as someone who writes books, because writing books is far more fraught than, I think, being on social media or on YouTube, because you've written it down and it's part of your whole thesis. And especially when you're trying to prove or disprove something, you've got to be very, very careful that what you say is put on paper in a way that is legally defensible if it ever comes to that. Right? Especially in cases that are quote unquote unsolved, right? Okay. Now, recently I was sent this screen grab. I'm going to share it with you guys. Just put it over here. Have you guys seen this? So recently I was sent this screen grab from Aynan Harsh, the chef who recently claimed he heard a scream. So here he says, on November 20th, FBI is spending over 10K a day trying to find the killer. I tend to agree with him that, you know what, I don't know if 50 employees is going to help much more than 15. I tend to agree with that. He also says 4 killed in stabbing across the street. In other words, from where he is, that was 5 days earlier. And 2 days after it actually happened. He says no screams, no evidence, no trace. So like professional killers, but why on 3 sorority girls? Now, some people have highlighted that and said what he's saying is not trustworthy, or that's proof of this or that. I look at that and I just think you could have heard this. This is what I thought even before he made the statement, is you can often have screams when people are having parties. You can have screams that are fun screams, and you can also have screams that are terrified screams, but they're within the funness of a party, and they can often mean nothing. Screams during reveling are actually quite common, and they're quite easy to dismiss. So where he says no screams, I don't kind of think, oh, he's lying or something like that. Is you kind of get the idea that he didn't think that that scream that he heard or the sound that he heard was relevant. That's the way that, you know, that it was just part of the party, right? And this was just 2 days later. But it is possible that on second thoughts, maybe things were mentioned, and that he thought, wow, maybe I need to think about this again. It is, I think, worth bringing up. It is worth saying, is this guy credible? He's just been quoted in the media saying he heard a scream, and yet Yeri says no screams. But I think what he's talking about here is no one else reported screams. And it may just be a case that he wasn't really thinking in a serious enough way that, you know what, I am a ear witness to this. Either an ear witness that I didn't hear anything, because there was another neighbor who said she didn't hear anything, or an ear witness who did, right? So is publishing what this guy says here a good thing? Or is it overstepping that boundary that we mentioned earlier? So this was November 14. He says this was the day after the crime. He says, in my neighbor's house. That's the 15th. That's the 20th. Is this overstepping that mark where you must respect someone's privacy? Right? And my answer to that is he's just been quoted in the mainstream media. Right? We mentioned him in this exclusive by Ashley Banfield. Shall I play it again quickly? This section here.
Newspaper, he thinks he may have heard a scream as he was dozing off about 4 a.m. And that is the same time police say the murders likely occurred. The neighbor said he dismissed that scream as a party sound and said he didn't think anything of it, even when investigators knocked on his door the next day. He also says he told police about a black luxury SUV that he had.
Yeah, so that definitely is frustrating, but I mean, it is what it is. So you've had some neighbors that it feels like they've kind of screwed up. And it also feels like law enforcement have kind of not paid that much attention either. For example, the police chief said he didn't know about the door being open when I did. I think many of you did. That the front door was wide open. We knew about that from the beginning. He's only just found that out after 4 weeks, right? But the question is it right showing, where is it now? Is it right showing this, giving this person's name? And as I say, he's already spoken to the mainstream media. He's given them his name. He's actively talking to us, I guess, right? And he's involved himself in the police investigation on something that is pertinent. And this does address his credibility. So that's why it's important to deal with. So often my rule of thumb is I deal with things that the mainstream media are dealing with as well, right? In terms of the privacy of people. If someone is on social media, only if they are engaging actively with YouTube creators, like on and on and on and on. For example, you saw that in the Barry Morphew case with relatives, and they want to get the message out there, then that's a little bit different. So because it's true crime, it is a relevant question whether Harsh saying he heard a scream is credible or not. That's why you would show this sort of thing, right? Ironically, it could be engaging with social media that reminded Inan about what he heard that night, or is it Inan? That was worth reporting. It could be conversations he had with social media that led to him thinking about that night in more detail and the details surrounding what he knew. It could be social media that conversations with them and details that were circling that he noticed that got him to rethink what he remembered from that night. Could be. In the John Benet Ramsey case, there's also a frustrating sort of broken telephone with a witness who heard a little girl scream there. It's very hard to get hold of information. It was also not, you would imagine it should have come out immediately, but it also came out in a sort of staggered fashion. Okay, so all of these are important and pertinent questions on an important and pertinent issue, time and manner of death. Yeah, so I think I'm not going to really take it further than that. It's been 3 hours, 24 minutes. I really need to go and sleep. I need to stay in the awake during the day, asleep at night scenario. So I think I need to end off here. My dog's sleeping. I need to sleep. And Bria, if you're still here, you also need to sleep. So I'm going to take a couple of questions of the last 5 minutes, and then I'm going to say adieu. Mel Stiller says, but where does the truth lie? I don't know. I don't think it's mutually exclusive. He may say it may both be true. he heard a scream. He didn't think it's them screaming. Later on, he did. And maybe it wasn't them screaming. Who knows? Paul says the weird thing is he lives next door. Most people want to not put themselves in the spotlight. Yes and no. I mean, in a case that everyone's talking about and it's unsolved and starting to affect you and you starting to think about it, and you see police cars, you may initially not want to get involved, but then later feel this needs to be sorted out. And I've got a role to play in that, I guess, right? Brittany says, do you have a psychology background? I always appreciate your depth of insight. So I think the way to answer that is I did study psychology at university. I had so many subjects. I studied law up till the third year level, but I did have psychology and industrial psychology. So yeah, I've got a little bit of that. I think I only had that to a second year level, like in psychology, industrial psychology. I have read a lot about psychology as well. I've read Ernest Becker, who I'd really recommend. And then, of course, you have to become a student of psychology when you write true crime books, and I've written dozens of books. So every true crime book you write, you also look at the criminal psychologist's assessment, and often I would find myself disagreeing and knowing why I disagree, and often feeling like they are misapplying, even as experts in their field, they're misapplying what they know. And it really made me realize I actually do have a place in this genre, especially as an author. The Humble Grower says, will he turn himself into Ali? I doubt it. Lisa says, did this ear witness record the scream? I doubt it. Yvonne says, do you believe him? Yeah, I do. I believe him because basically the mainstream media believe him, and because he's talking about the right place and time. But I think it's a valid question. Do we believe him? I think it's a valid question. I also think, yeah, that's true. Being a writer would require studying human behavior. I mean, in the Henry von Bredar case, even though I was in court, I would watch the live streams, and I would not dictate, transcribe the live streams, and which meant going second by second through the live streams, slowing them down, playing them, trying. Sometimes he would mutter or mumble, and you'd have to play certain aspects 5 times, 10 times to get exactly what he was saying. And sometimes you want to add the ums in the right place so that his voice comes through. And you pick up all those little subtleties when you slow it down, when you go on the gravel road that is true crime, you have to slow down to pick up all those little details. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, another minute or two, let's see. Brittany says, I don't trust the mainstream media. Then you should really not trust me, and I'm being serious about that. I derive a lot of my work, I derive a lot of what I know from mainstream media stories. Brian Enton is a mainstream media practitioner. He's on the ground. He's seeing activities going on all the time. I used to be a photojournalist, and in a way I still am, an investigative photojournalist. They tend to be some of the best capturers of narrative in the world, better than detectives, because they are not only writing and photographing, but they dedicate themselves wholesale to a single story. So if you think that the mainstream media is fake and untrustworthy, you should really not trust me because I'm a mainstream media person. I derive a lot of my content from the mainstream media, and I consider myself a product of the mainstream media as well. If you think CNN is fake, if you think New York Times is fake, then I think you should think I'm fake as well. You should think my arguments are fake, I think, right? Joseph Connor, good to see you here. And Pauline says, have you ruled out that the suspect might be female? I think there's a very, very slight chance, like 1% chance. I think it's possible, just very unlikely. Jodi Arias killed one person with a knife. There are very few killers of multiple people with a knife that are female. But it certainly is possible. Someone says, I believed him until... So as far as I know, this guy didn't make a recording. I think someone is saying he made a recording. But if he's saying he made a recording, then I don't think I trust him, right? If he says he made a recording, then I don't think I trust him. But if he says that he heard something, then I do believe him. If he goes as far as to say he made a recording, well, then I don't trust him. I think someone is claiming that he made a recording, which I don't think is true. Brittany says, I actually really like news networks with Brian and Ashley. Okay, well, they are mainstream media. So you can just say there's certain mainstream media I like and certain that I don't like. You say he edited his Facebook post you just shown. In what way? Okay, let's deal with the last couple of questions. I really need to go. I can just sense how my dog is snoozing and he's going to want to wake up when he's ready and I will not have slept very much. Okay, let's deal with the last couple of questions. Okay, well, if you think I'm more logical, great, thanks a lot. One of the reasons I became a writer was I felt, wow, you could have done that story so much better, or you completely missed the point with that. And I still think that that's the case with true crime. There's still a lot of cases where journalists cover true crime, and I'm like, you totally don't know what you're talking about. And not in an arrogant way, in a way that you simply don't know this case very well. And I have sometimes engaged with mainstream media journalists, and you've got to try and explain to them what's going on in a case, and they like don't understand because they jump around from story to story. But I appreciate that. He deleted the no scream spot. Okay. Well, maybe because he was getting a lot of flack. I mean, I would imagine people are jumping all over him. And maybe he feels, well, I did hear a scream and I did say that, but I don't want to be attacked for it anymore. But that is an interesting observation. I mean, the fact is, whether he's credible, there's a question there. That's a fact. And it's a very important question. If someone did scream, then it means someone wasn't killed while she was sleeping in her bed. The other question to ask is, was the scream that he heard a woman's scream? And it sounds like it was. Yeah, it is 1:35 a.m. in South Africa. I don't think so. I think Jodi Arias had a specific fixation with Travis. I mean, she was basically also stalking him. So I think it was definitely that way. Good night, where the wind blows. Mel Stiller says you're unafraid to explore the ins and outs of a situation. Thanks a lot. Barbara says much gratitude. To be honest, I believe that someone had to have screamed or someone had to have made a sound. And I do wonder, well, how could the roommates at the bottom not have heard it? But it is possible. It is possible to be in such a state of deep sleep and drunk that you don't hear certain things. It doesn't always seem to make sense, but it is possible. I would be more surprised that they're not screams than that there are screams. That's how I personally feel about it. I don't necessarily think it's absolute that this guy heard them, but I do think that there were screams. Don't you guys agree with that? I agree with that. I agree with that. Thanks a lot, Miami Lifestyle. That's a great thing to say, and I think a great area to end off on. Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone, for joining me here. I'll be obviously continuing coverage. I'll try and do another live tomorrow. There were things I really wanted to touch on in this that I didn't quite touch on. I really want to deal with the drug narrative in more detail, so look out for that. And I don't know, I feel like this case could actually come to a result really within the next few days. Honestly, it feels like every time you search for news on this case, it feels like they could actually announce an arrest. That's how I feel. I mean, just with the white vehicle, police got hundreds of tips just out of that. Who knows what came out of that? Let me just do a quick search, and then I'm going to go. Yeah, so this is basically what's just come out now. Let me just put that on over there. Idaho cop spark fears quadruple murderer could strike again this weekend. I don't know why it's doing that, but could strike again this weekend. Warns people to keep phones handy. So I don't know, it feels like things are definitely sort of heating up for the killer and sort of for law enforcement as well. So anyway, I'll be back probably tomorrow, but let's just observe the 1 month anniversary of this case, and let's hope that we start seeing real results really soon. Meanwhile, Timmy's gonna be my bed partner quite soon. He thinks he's getting some ASMR now, but it's not going to happen. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for joining me. Mods, new members, new subscribers, thank you all for being here. I hope this was a interesting and informative thing, and I hope it has addressed to you the basic thing of why. It was because a gratuitous experience was interrupted, and so the crime itself is also gratuitous, right? The gratuitous aspect is central to the why. Okay, thanks very much, everyone, for being here. Also, thank you for those super chats. Really appreciate it. Take care of yourselves. Remember to unplug and to start preparing for your Christmases as well. Remember that's also a time that we need to celebrate, a time that comes once a year. So make sure you make some time for yourself, for your loved ones, for the joy of Christmas. So remember that. Thanks, everyone. Take care. See you guys next time.